school photographer became concerned when a 9-year-old boy refused to remove his jacket for pictures. When he finally agreed, what she saw on his arms made her scream for the principal. Jessica Winters adjusted the height of her tripod for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The gymnasium of Millfield Elementary School smelled exactly as she remembered from her own childhood. A mixture of floor polish, the rubbery scent of basketballs, and the lingering ghost of yesterday's cafeteria lunch. The familiarity was both comforting and excruciating. "Is the lighting okay in here, Ms. Winters?" asked Principal Eleanor Harrington, her voice carrying that unmistakable administrative tone. Polite efficiency masking mild impatience. "We need to stay on schedule if we're going to get through all 400 students today." Jessica forced a smile, the kind she'd perfected during high-profile photo shoots in Boston when clients made impossible demands. "Almost ready, Principal Harrington. Just making some final adjustments." 6 months ago, she would have been photographing an up-and-coming jazz musician for the cover of Boston Magazine, or capturing intimate portraits of corporate CEOs who paid premium rates for her ability to make them appear both powerful and approachable. Now, she was setting up a portable backdrop against the wall of her childhood elementary school, preparing to immortalize gap-toothed smiles and cowlicks that wouldn't lie flat despite mother's best efforts with hair gel. Life had a cruel sense of humor. The divorce had been messier than she'd ever anticipated. Richard hadn't just taken her confidence and their shared apartment in Cambridge. He'd also stolen her professional network, turning former clients against her with whispered suggestions about her emotional instability and artistic unreliability. One canceled contract had led to another, and within 3 months, Jessica had found herself facing an empty calendar and mounting credit card debt. Coming back to Millfield, Connecticut hadn't been a choice so much as a surrender. The small town 30 minutes outside of Hartford had remained frozen in time. The same family-owned businesses lining Main Street, the same seasonal festivals, the same interconnected web of relationships where everyone knew not just your name but your entire family history going back 3 generations. Mrs. Dunwell, Jessica's mother's bridge partner, had mentioned the school photography contract to Jessica's mother, who had mentioned it to Jessica during one of their increasingly tense phone calls about when Jessica might get back on her feet. It wasn't Jessica's usual style of photography, but beggars, as her mother had helpfully pointed out, couldn't be choosers. "The first class will be arriving in 5 minutes, Principal Harrington announced, checking her watch with the precision of someone who measured her life in bell schedules and standardized testing windows. Jessica nodded, making a final adjustment to her camera settings. Eleanor Harrington hadn't changed much since Jessica had been a student here. Her auburn hair now contained strategic highlights to cover the gray, and fine lines framed her eyes. But she still wore the same style of sensible pumps and still carried the same air of someone who believed structure was the solution to all of life's problems. "We'll be efficient," Jessica promised. "I've done plenty of volume photography before." This wasn't entirely true. Her specialty had been artistic portraiture, not assembly line school photos, but she wasn't about to admit that to Harrington. The principal seemed satisfied with this response. "Excellent. The teachers have the schedule. Each class will come in alphabetically." She hesitated, then added in a slightly softer tone, "It's nice to have a local handling the photography this year. The company we used before sent different photographers each time, and some of them weren't great with the children." Before Jessica could respond, the gymnasium doors swung open and Ms. Peterson's kindergarten class filed in, looking like a parade of anxiety and excitement in miniature form. Some children bounced with barely contained energy, while others clutched their teachers' hands, eyes wide with apprehension. "Look alive," Principal Harrington murmured before striding forward with a bright smile. "Good morning, kindergartners. Today is a very special day. You're going to have your very first Millfield Elementary School pictures taken." Jessica watched the varying reactions, from beaming grins to trembling lips, and took a deep breath. This was going to be a long day. By mid-morning, Jessica had fallen into a rhythm. The process was straightforward. Each child came forward when their name was called, sat on the small stool positioned in front of the navy blue backdrop, followed Jessica's gentle directions to sit up straight and smile, and then returned to their class line after the flash. Some needed more coaxing than others, A few of the younger ones had dissolved into tears, requiring teacher intervention and promises of stickers. But overall, the day was progressing smoothly, if monotonously. "You're good with them?" commented Ms. Abigail Mercer as her third-grade class waited their turn. She was young, probably fresh out of college, with an enthusiasm that hadn't yet been weathered by years in the educational system. "Some of the photographers we've had made the kids feel like they were on an assembly line." Jessica adjusted her camera as a small boy with glasses too large for his face beamed at her direction. "They're people, not products," she replied, snapping the photo. "Perfect, Justin. Next up is Eliza Martin." A girl with intricate braids and a carefully chosen outfit stepped forward, clearly having prepared for this moment. Jessica recognized the type. She'd been that child herself, planning her school picture outfit weeks in advance, practicing her smile in the mirror. "I like your dress, Eliza. The purple really brings out your eyes." The girl's practiced smile transformed into something genuine. "Thank you. My mom said the same thing." As Eliza posed confidently, Jessica felt a small pang. This was the type of connection she'd always valued in her professional work. The brief, authentic moment between photographer and subject. Perhaps school photography wasn't quite the creative death sentence she'd feared. "Beautiful. Next is Thomas Collins." No child stepped forward. Ms. Mercer glanced down her line. "Tommy? It's your turn, buddy." Jessica followed the teacher's gaze to a thin boy near the back of the line who seemed to be trying his best to disappear into the wall. He wore an oversized jacket despite the warm September weather, the sleeves hanging past his fingertips. His sandy brown hair fell across his forehead, partially obscuring eyes that darted nervously between his teacher and the floor. "Tommy, everyone's waiting," Ms. Mercer said, her voice gentle but firm. The boy took a reluctant step forward, then another, his shoulders hunched as if preparing for a blow. When he finally reached the photography area, Jessica noticed details that her professional eye had been trained to catch. The slight yellowish tinge of a fading bruise near his temple, partially hidden by his hair. The way he kept his arms wrapped tightly around himself. The scuffed sneakers that looked a size too small. "Hi, Tommy," Jessica said softly, crouching down slightly to meet his eye level. "I'm Ms. Winters. All you have to do is sit on this stool for a quick picture, and then you're all done." Tommy glanced at the stool as if it might bite him. He perched on the very edge, back rigid, eyes fixed on the floor. "That's great," Jessica encouraged. "Now, for the photo, we'll need to see your face. Can you look up a little?" Tommy raised his eyes fractionally, revealing irises the color of faded denim. Once bright, now washed out and weary in a way no 9-year-old should be. "Wonderful. Now, we'll need to take your jacket off for the photo." The effect was immediate. Tommy's entire body tensed, his hands gripping the edges of his jacket. "No," he whispered, so quietly Jessica almost didn't hear it. Ms. Mercer stepped closer. "Tommy, everyone needs to have their picture taken without outerwear. It's warm in here anyway. You must be uncomfortable." "I'm fine," Tommy insisted, his voice stronger now, edged with panic. "I want to wear my jacket." Jessica noticed the growing restlessness of the students still waiting in line. Principal Harrington, who had returned to check on their progress, was frowning at the schedule in her hand. "Is there a problem?" Harrington asked, approaching the small standoff. Ms. Mercer explained the situation in hushed tones while Tommy seemed to shrink further into himself. Jessica observed him carefully, noting the way his eyes tracked the adults' conversation, the slight tremor in his hands, the thin film of sweat forming on his forehead despite his insistence on keeping the jacket. Principal Harrington addressed Tommy directly. "Thomas, we need to follow the same rules for everyone. Your classmates all took their jackets off for their photos." Tommy's breathing quickened, taking on a shallow, panicked quality. Jessica recognized the signs of rising anxiety and intervened before the situation could escalate. "It's all right," she said calmly. "Why don't we take a quick break? Tommy can go to the end of the line and have a little more time to get comfortable." Principal Harrington looked as if she wanted to argue but instead pressed her lips into a thin line and nodded curtly. "Very well. Abigail, please continue with the rest of your students. Thomas can have a few minutes to reconsider. As Tommy shuffled to the back of the line with visible relief, Jessica noticed he was clutching the strap of his backpack, where a small Captain America shield pin was attached. I like your pin, she commented casually as he passed. I'm a big fan of Captain America myself. Tommy paused, giving her a quick, surprised glance. You are? Jessica nodded. Absolutely. Steve Rogers never backed down from standing up for what's right, even when he was the smallest guy around. Something flickered in Tommy's eyes. A brief connection. A moment of recognition between two people who understood something about feeling powerless. He was brave, Tommy murmured, his finger tracing the outline of the shield pin. One of the bravest, Jessica agreed. And you know what I think? I think being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do what you need to do, even when you are scared. Tommy seemed to consider this, his brow furrowing in thought. Jessica didn't push further, instead returning to photograph the remaining students in Ms. Mercer's class. But she kept one eye on Tommy, who stood watching the process with an intensity that suggested he was working through some internal struggle. The morning progressed into afternoon. Jessica took a quick lunch break, eating a sandwich from the deli down the street while reviewing the morning's photographs on her laptop. The images were technically fine, lighting balanced, expressions generally pleasant, but they lacked the artistic quality she'd prided herself on in her previous work. These were functional photographs, not art. She tried not to dwell on how far she'd fallen professionally. When she returned to the gymnasium, she found Tommy Collins waiting by her equipment, still wearing his jacket but looking marginally less terrified. Hi again, Jessica said, surprised. Did Ms. Mercer send you back? Tommy shook his head. I came by myself. During lunch. I see. Jessica set down her camera bag, moving deliberately to avoid startling him. Did you change your mind about the photo? The boy stared at his shoes. Maybe. His fingers worried the edge of his jacket sleeve. Are you really a Captain America fan? Jessica smiled, recognizing the question as the test it was. I am. I always liked that he wasn't born special. He became special because of what was inside him all along. Tommy nodded seriously. My mom liked him too. She said. His voice faltered. She said sometimes the people who seem weakest are actually the strongest. Your mom sounds very wise, Jessica said gently. She died, Tommy stated flatly, the words carrying the weight of practiced delivery. 2 years ago. Cancer. I'm very sorry to hear that, Tommy. He shrugged with a forced casualness that broke Jessica's heart. It's just me and my dad now. Something in his tone when he mentioned his father caught Jessica's attention. A subtle tightening, a barely perceptible withdrawal. She'd spent years learning to read micro-expressions for her portrait work. What she saw in Tommy's face raised alarm bells. You know, Jessica said carefully, I could take your picture with the jacket on, but the school policy is pretty strict about the dress code for photos. She paused, then added, whatever you decide is okay with me. Sometimes rules are important and sometimes there are good reasons to break them. Tommy looked up at her, searching her face as if trying to decode a complex puzzle. If I take it off, he said finally, his voice barely audible. You won't tell anyone why I didn't want to? The question sent a chill through Jessica. That depends, Tommy. If someone is hurting you, I would need to tell someone who can help. His face immediately closed off, panic flashing in his eyes. Nobody's hurting me. I fell. A lot. I'm clumsy. It was the rehearsed quality of the excuse that disturbed Jessica most. Before she could respond, the gymnasium doors opened as classes began returning from lunch. Think about it, Jessica told him quietly. I'll be here all day. Tommy nodded once before darting away, rejoining his classmates who were now lining up against the far wall for afternoon activities. The afternoon session proceeded much like the morning. A parade of children, some eager, some reluctant, all momentarily immortalized by the click of Jessica's camera. But her thoughts kept returning to Tommy Collins and his oversized jacket, the fear in his eyes, the carefully rehearsed explanation for whatever he was hiding beneath those long sleeves. When Ms. Mercer's class returned for their gym period, Jessica noticed Tommy hanging back from the group activities, his eyes occasionally finding hers across the room. She focused on her work, giving him space to make his own decision. Near the end of the day, as she was photographing the last few fourth graders, she sensed someone approach from behind. Turning, she found Tommy standing there, jaw set with determination despite the fear evident in his posture. "I want to take my picture now," he announced, his voice stronger than it had been earlier. Jessica nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite her surprise. "Of course. Let me just finish with Zach here, and then it's your turn." After completing the last scheduled photograph, Jessica adjusted her equipment while Tommy took his place on the stool. His face was pale, his knuckles white where they gripped the edges of his jacket. "Whenever you're ready, Tommy," Jessica said softly. The boy took a deep, shuddering breath. "My dad says I shouldn't show anyone. He says they'll take me away, and then I'll have no one." Jessica felt her heart constrict. "Tommy, but I remember what my mom used to say about being brave." His voice wavered but didn't break. "And Captain America wouldn't hide." With those words, Tommy slowly unzipped his jacket. As he slipped it off his shoulders, Jessica had to fight to maintain her professional composure. His thin arms were a map of abuse, yellowish-purple bruises in various stages of healing, circular burns that could only have come from cigarettes, and what appeared to be belt marks wrapping around his forearms. Some were fresh, angry red against his pale skin, while others had faded to dull shadows. The horror of what she was seeing overwhelmed Jessica's professional detachment. A gasp escaped her lips, followed by a sound between a cry and a scream that echoed in the now-quiet gymnasium. "Principal Harrington," she called, her voice cracking. "I need Principal Harrington immediately." Tommy sat frozen on the stool, his jacket pooled around his waist, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and something else, perhaps relief. As people came running toward them, drawn by Jessica's cry, time seemed to slow. In that suspended moment, Jessica met Tommy's gaze and saw the silent plea there. Not just for help, but for someone to finally see him. Really see him, beneath the careful facade of normalcy that had hidden his suffering for so long. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though she had no right to make such promises. "You're not alone anymore." Principal Harrington arrived, her sensible heels clacking rapidly across the gymnasium floor. Her question died on her lips as she took in the sight before her. Tommy's exposed arms telling a story no child should ever have to tell. "Oh my God," she breathed, her administrative mask slipping to reveal genuine horror. Jessica moved instinctively to stand beside Tommy, placing herself between him and the growing crowd of curious onlookers. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about her failed career or her uncertain future in Millfield. She was thinking only of the boy who had found the courage to reveal his wounds, despite all the forces telling him to keep them hidden. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a long-buried memory stirred, of another child decades earlier, who had learned to hide her own bruises beneath long sleeves and carefully crafted stories. A child who had wished, more than anything, for someone to ask the right questions, to look beneath the surface, to sound the alarm that she herself had been too frightened to sound. As Principal Harrington pulled out her phone to make the call that would set unstoppable events in motion, Jessica placed a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder, not enough to startle him, just enough to let him know he wasn't facing this moment alone. "You did the right thing," she told him quietly. "The brave thing." Tommy looked up at her, tears finally spilling from eyes that had likely held them back for far too long. "Will they believe me?" he asked, his voice small but steady. "Dad says no one will believe me over him." Jessica felt a surge of determination rising through her chest, burning away the resignation that had defined her return to Millfield. "I believe you," she said firmly. "And I promise you, Tommy, I will make sure others do too." The next 24 hours unfolded with the disorienting intensity of a fever dream. After Principal Harrington's call, the school had erupted into controlled chaos. The gymnasium cleared, a school counselor summoned to sit with Tommy while they waited, and Jessica sequestered in Harrington's office to provide a detailed account of what she'd witnessed. "Tell me exactly what happened," Principal Harrington had demanded, her pen poised over a legal pad, the professional administrator fully in control despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Every detail, Ms. Winters." Jessica had recounted it all, Tommy's reluctance, his eventual courage, the unmistakable evidence of abuse mapped across his small arms. She'd been surprised by her own composure, the way her photographer's eye allowed her to describe the injuries with clinical precision. The cigarette burns, 7 of them, varying in age from fresh to partially healed. The distinctive pattern of bruising consistent with fingers gripping too tightly, the linear marks that could only have been inflicted by some kind of strap or belt. Now, alone in the small one-bedroom apartment she'd rented above Millfield Pharmacy, Jessica paced the creaking floorboards, sleep an impossibility despite her exhaustion. The clock on her microwave displayed 3:17 a.m. in harsh green numbers, casting an eerie glow across her sparse kitchenette. They'd taken Tommy away, of course. A social worker named Diane Werner had arrived, her face kind but her eyes weary with the burden of seeing too many children in crisis. She'd spoken to Tommy in hushed tones while Detective Michael Reeves, a broad-shouldered man with prematurely silver hair and lines etched deeply around his mouth, had taken initial statements from Jessica and Principal Harrington. "We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow for a formal interview," Reeves had told her, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man his size. "And we'll need copies of any photographs you took." Jessica had nodded mechanically, her mind still processing the events of the day. What's going to happen to him? To Tommy? For now, emergency placement with a foster family who specializes in these situations. Reeves had hesitated, then added, "Ms. Winters, I've been doing this job for 15 years. Kids don't make this stuff up, and those injuries didn't happen by accident. You did the right thing." She'd wanted to believe him, but doubt crept in during the late hours when she couldn't sleep. Had she overreacted? Should she have spoken to Tommy privately first, rather than calling out in front of everyone? What if she'd made everything worse? Unable to quiet her mind, Jessica opened her laptop and clicked through the day's photographs. Most were unremarkable, standard school portraits that would be purchased by parents and relegated to refrigerator doors or grandparents' wallets. When she reached Tommy's file, her breath caught. She'd been so focused on his injuries that she hadn't really looked at the photograph she'd instinctively taken just before he'd removed his jacket. It captured him sitting rigidly on the stool, his face a study in conflicting emotions: fear, resignation, and something else. Something like hope or the desperate wish for it. Looking at it now, she realized she'd accidentally created a powerful portrait. Not a school photograph, but an artistic capture of a pivotal moment in a child's life. The moment before revelation. The last second of a secret kept too long. Jessica remembered what her mentor in Boston had once told her. A true portrait shows the person, not the persona. Tommy's school picture had done exactly that, cutting through the facade of normalcy that had shielded his suffering from notice. She closed the laptop, unable to look at his face any longer without her chest constricting painfully. Sleep still eluded her, but Jessica found herself moving with new purpose, gathering the portfolio she hadn't opened since returning to Millfield. Inside were her best works, the photographs that had won awards, graced magazine covers, and established her reputation before Richard had methodically destroyed it. Tomorrow would bring questions, doubts from those who couldn't or wouldn't believe that abuse could happen in their picture-perfect town. Jessica needed to remind herself that she knew how to see truth through a lens, that her eyes hadn't deceived her, that after months of feeling worthless and defeated, she had finally done something that mattered. The Millfield police station occupied a red brick building on Maple Street, its architecture more reminiscent of a small-town library than a center for law enforcement. Jessica arrived at precisely 9 a.m., clutching a USB drive containing Tommy's photographs and wearing the most professional outfit she could assemble from her reduced wardrobe: black pants, a navy blazer over a white blouse, and low heels that clicked authoritatively across the station's linoleum floor. Detective Reeves met her in the lobby. In daylight, she could see the fatigue shadowing his eyes, suggesting he might have slept as poorly as she had. "Ms. Winters, thank you for coming in," he greeted her, extending a hand. His grip was firm but not overpowering. "We'll be using interview room 2. Can I get you coffee before we start?" The offer of coffee, rather than an immediate barrage of questions, caught Jessica off guard. "Yes, please. Black is fine." Reeves nodded and disappeared briefly, returning with 2 mugs. He handed one to Jessica before leading her down a short hallway. "Fair warning, our coffee makes gas station coffee seem gourmet, but it's got enough caffeine to jumpstart a car battery." The attempted levity seemed designed to put her at ease, but Jessica sensed the gravity beneath it. This wasn't his first case of child abuse, and the routine nature of the process, the coffee, the interview room, the careful documentation, only underscored how common such cases must be, even in a town that prided itself on its family values. Interview room 2 was small but not claustrophobic, containing a simple table, 3 chairs, and a conspicuous camera mounted in the corner. Reeves gestured for Jessica to take a seat while he set up a digital recorder. "I need to record this for the official record," he explained. "Just state your full name and contact information when I ask, and then walk me through yesterday's events as completely as you can remember." Jessica nodded, setting her coffee aside. "Has anyone spoken to his father yet?" A shadow crossed Reeves' face. "Robert Collins was brought in for questioning late yesterday. He was not cooperative. Claims his son is accident-prone and that you're exaggerating what you saw." "I'm not," Jessica said firmly. "I believe you." Reeves met her eyes directly. "But Robert Collins is a prominent businessman in Millfield. He's donated to charity fundraisers, sponsors the Little League team, and sits on the Chamber of Commerce. There are people who will find it difficult to reconcile the man they think they know with what you're describing." The implication was clear. This wouldn't be a simple case of reporting abuse and seeing justice served. There would be resistance, denial, perhaps even backlash. Jessica felt a knot forming in her stomach. "I know what I saw," she repeated, steeling herself. "And I have the photographs." Reeves' expression shifted slightly, a flash of respect crossing his features. "Good. Let's get started then." The formal interview lasted over 2 hours. Jessica recounted every detail, from Tommy's initial reluctance to the revelation of his injuries. Reeves asked thoughtful, specific questions that helped her remember additional details. How Tommy had moved carefully, as if in pain. How he'd flinched when adult voices were raised. How his excuses had sounded rehearsed. When they reached the topic of the photographs, Jessica connected her USB drive to Reeves' computer. Together, they examined the images. First, the standard school portrait taken while Tommy still wore his jacket, then several inadvertent shots captured during the moment of revelation. These weren't posed photographs but documentary evidence, clinical and disturbing in their clarity. "These will be crucial," Reeves said quietly, making notes as they viewed each image, especially since they establish a timeline. The varying stages of healing indicate ongoing abuse, not a single incident. The detective's matter-of-fact assessment made Jessica's throat tighten. She'd been trained to see beauty through her camera lens, to capture moments of joy, introspection, or artistic expression. Using her skills to document a child's suffering felt like a perversion of everything she'd loved about photography. "What happens now?" she asked when the interview finally concluded. Reeves sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw where silver stubble had emerged. "The district attorney's office will determine whether to file charges based on our investigation. Tommy's been placed with Harold and Sunita Patel for the time being. They're experienced foster parents who've worked with traumatized children before. He'll be interviewed by specialists trained to work with kids in these situations." "And his father?" "Robert Collins has been released pending investigation, but there's a temporary protection order preventing him from contacting Tommy." Reeves' expression darkened. "Between you and me, Collins already has his lawyer working overtime, claiming Tommy's injuries were self-inflicted or the result of normal childhood accidents." Jessica felt sick. "That's unfortunately common," Reeves finished for her. "Abusers rarely admit what they've done, especially those with reputations to protect." As Jessica gathered her belongings, preparing to leave, Reeves handed her a business card. "My direct line is on the back. If you remember anything else, Or if you experience any harassment because of your report, call me immediately. Harassment, Jessica echoed. Reeves' expression was grim. Millfield is a small town, Ms. Winters. Word travels fast and people tend to choose sides. Robert Collins has friends, influential ones. Not everyone will appreciate what you've done. I just did what anyone would do, Jessica protested. No, Reeves said quietly. You did what everyone should do, but what too many people find reasons not to. That makes you both rare and, unfortunately, a target. Jessica discovered the truth of Reeves' warning almost immediately. As she walked out of the police station, she nearly collided with Lisa Bennington, once her closest childhood friend, now the office manager at Collins Realty. Jessica. Lisa's voice was cold. Her arms crossed defensively across her chest. I heard what you did. Jessica stepped back, surprised by the hostility radiating from the woman she'd once shared secrets and sleepovers with. Lisa? What are you doing here? Waiting for you, obviously. Lisa glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard before continuing in a lower, more intense voice. Do you have any idea what you've done? Robert is devastated. They took his son away based on what? Some bruises that could have come from anywhere? Tommy plays soccer, for God's sake. Kids get bruises. The accusation in Lisa's tone ignited something in Jessica that burned through her exhaustion and uncertainty. These weren't soccer bruises, Lisa. They were cigarette burns and belt marks. No child gets those from playing sports. So you say, Lisa retorted. But Robert says Tommy's been acting out since his mother died, hurting himself sometimes, lying about how he got injured. Jessica stared at her former friend, momentarily speechless. You can't possibly believe that. What I believe, Lisa said, stepping closer, is that you came back to this town after failing in Boston, and you needed to make a splash, get people talking about you again. Well, congratulations, you've succeeded. Everyone's talking about how Jessica Winters swooped in and destroyed a family that was already struggling with grief. The accusation struck with precision, targeting Jessica's deepest insecurities about her motives. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was there some unconscious desire for attention behind her actions? Had she overreacted to make herself feel important again? No. The image of Tommy's arms flashed in her mind, dispelling the doubt. Those injuries were real, deliberate, and inflicted by an adult. You didn't see what I saw, Jessica said firmly. And I don't care what people say about me. This isn't about me. It's about Tommy. Lisa's laugh was bitter. That's rich. It's always been about you, Jess. Even in high school, everything had to revolve around Jessica Winters and her big dreams of escaping our boring little town. Well, look who came crawling back when those dreams fell apart. The personal attack stung, but Jessica refused to be baited into an argument about ancient history. Think whatever you want about me, Lisa, but ask yourself this. If there's even a small chance that Tommy is being abused, wouldn't you want someone to speak up? Robert would never hurt Tommy, Lisa insisted. He loves that boy more than anything. After Elaine died, Tommy became his whole world. People aren't always what they seem, Jessica said quietly. Not even to those closest to them. Something flickered in Lisa's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or a memory that contradicted her certainty. But it vanished quickly, replaced by hardened resolve. You've made a terrible mistake, she said coldly. And Robert won't be the only one who suffers for it. This town takes care of its own, Jessica. You might want to remember that you stopped being one of us the day you left. With that parting shot, Lisa turned and strode away, leaving Jessica standing alone on the police station steps, the weight of what was coming settling heavily on her shoulders. By afternoon, Jessica could feel the town's atmosphere shifting. She'd stopped at Millfield Diner for a late lunch, only to find conversations halting abruptly when she entered. The waitress who'd been friendly yesterday now served her with tight-lipped efficiency, avoiding eye contact. From a corner booth, a group of middle-aged men, property developers who frequently worked with Collins Realty, stared openly, their disapproval palpable. Jessica ate quickly, ignoring the whispers that followed her, and headed to the school to collect her photography equipment. She'd left it set up in the gymnasium, expecting to return for a routine day of work. That now seemed like a naive assumption from a different lifetime. The school hallways were quiet, classes in session behind closed doors. Jessica made her way to the gymnasium, where she found Principal Harrington supervising as a maintenance worker dismantled the temporary photography backdrop. "Ms. Winters," Harrington acknowledged her with a nod. "I was about to call you about your equipment." Jessica began packing her camera and lighting gear, acutely aware of the principal's evaluating gaze. "I apologize for the disruption to your schedule. I assume you'll want to reschedule the remaining classes with another photographer." Harrington's posture was stiff, her expression carefully neutral. "The school board has decided to contract with Perlman Photography from Hartford to complete the project." The decision shouldn't have surprised Jessica, yet it still delivered a sharp sting of rejection. "I see. It's nothing personal," Harrington added, though her tone suggested otherwise. Given the circumstances, the board felt it would be less disruptive for everyone. Jessica closed her equipment case with a decisive click. "By circumstances, you mean the fact that I reported child abuse instead of ignoring it?" Harrington flinched slightly at the directness. "That's not fair, Ms. Winters. No one is suggesting you should have ignored what you saw. But there are concerns about how the situation was handled. The public nature of the discovery has created quite a stir." "I didn't plan for it to happen that way," Jessica countered. "But I'm not sorry it did. At least now Tommy is safe." "Allegedly," Harrington corrected automatically, then had the grace to look embarrassed. "I mean, of course, these are serious allegations that must be investigated thoroughly. But Robert Collins has been a generous supporter of this school for years. He established a memorial scholarship in his late wife's name that has helped several of our graduates attend college." The implication was clear. Robert's community standing and financial contributions were being weighed against Tommy's welfare. Jessica felt her professional demeanor slipping. "With all due respect, Principal Harrington, no amount of donations justifies what was done to that child. I saw those injuries up close. They weren't accidents." Harrington sighed, seeming to age before Jessica's eyes. "I've been an educator for 27 years, Ms. Winters. I've had to make reports to Child Protective Services before, but never involving someone like Robert Collins." She lowered her voice. "His family goes back 4 generations in Millfield. His grandfather built half the businesses on Main Street. The Collins name means something here." "And Tommy?" Jessica challenged. "What does his suffering mean?" Harrington didn't answer directly. Instead, she glanced at her watch and said, "I need to get back to my office. You can finish collecting your things, but please sign out at the front desk when you leave." Left alone in the gymnasium, Jessica felt a wave of futility wash over her. If even Principal Harrington, a woman whose career was dedicated to children's welfare, was hesitant to fully support Tommy, what chance did he have against the Collins family legacy? As she gathered the last of her equipment, the gymnasium door opened again. Jessica looked up, expecting the maintenance worker, but instead found Ms. Mercer, Tommy's teacher, hovering uncertainly near the entrance. "I heard you were here," Abigail Mercer said, stepping inside and letting the door swing shut behind her. "I wanted to talk to you before you left." Jessica straightened, noticing the younger woman's reddened eyes and the way she continuously twisted a silver ring on her right hand, signs of distress she couldn't quite conceal. "What can I do for you, Ms. Mercer?" "Abigail, please." She moved closer, lowering her voice despite the empty gymnasium. I wanted to thank you for what you did for Tommy." The unexpected support momentarily robbed Jessica of words. "You believe me, then? About what I saw?" Abigail's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I should have seen it myself. There were signs, so many signs. Tommy used to be one of my most engaged students. After his mother died, of course he withdrew some, but these past few months," she shook her head, "he's been absent frequently. When he is here, he's exhausted, jumpy. His homework has suffered. He stopped participating in group activities. Those could be signs of grief, Jessica suggested gently. That's what I told myself, Abigail admitted, shame evident in her voice. But there were other things. In gym class, he never changed with the other boys. During the hot spell in early September, he still wore long sleeves. Once, I saw him wince when another student bumped into him in the hallway, like he was in pain. Did you report your concerns to anyone? Abigail's gaze dropped to the floor. I spoke to Robert at parent-teacher conferences. He was very charming. Explained that Tommy was having a hard time adjusting to life without his mother. Said they were in grief counseling together. Her voice cracked. I believed him. God help me. I wanted to believe him. Jessica recognized the self-recrimination in Abigail's tone. It mirrored her own midnight doubts about whether she should have noticed something earlier, acted more quickly, done more to help. Abusers are often very convincing, Jessica said, remembering her own mother's explanations to concerned neighbors years ago. They have to be, to keep their secrets. I've known Robert for almost 2 years, Abigail continued. He volunteers for school events. He remembers every staff member's birthday with a card. He seems so normal. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I even had dinner with him once after a school fundraiser. He talked about Tommy the whole time. How proud he was of him. How much he wanted to protect him after losing his mother. The revelation added another layer to Abigail's guilt. She hadn't just been fooled as a teacher, but also as a woman who had perhaps begun to see Robert Collins as more than just a student's parent. Abigail, Jessica said carefully, abusers don't walk around with warning signs. They're experts at presenting a perfect face to the world. You couldn't have known. I should have, Abigail insisted. It's my job to protect my students, to notice when something's wrong. She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. The other teachers are divided. Some think you overreacted, or that Tommy must be confused about how he got those injuries. But I know, her voice broke, I know I failed him, and I won't do it again. Jessica reached out, squeezing the younger woman's shoulder. Then help him now. When the investigation proceeds, tell them everything you just told me. Tommy will need people who believe him. Abigail nodded, straightening her shoulders with newfound resolve. I will, no matter what it costs me here. As the teacher turned to leave, Jessica called after her. Abigail, thank you for believing him, for believing me. Truth shouldn't be a matter of belief, Abigail replied sadly. But in this town, it seems like it is. By evening, Jessica's apartment had become both sanctuary and prison. She'd stopped at the grocery store on her way home, enduring more stares and whispers, only to find her usual cashier suddenly closing his lane when she approached. The message was clear. She'd disrupted the community's comfortable illusions, and they weren't grateful. Her phone had begun ringing with calls from unknown numbers, some hanging up immediately, others leaving voicemails ranging from concerned, I heard what happened at the school. Are you okay? To hostile, mind your own business, you attention-seeking bitch. She'd just finished microwaving a frozen dinner when a knock at her door startled her. Jessica approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to find Detective Reeves standing in the hallway, his expression grim. Detective? She said as she opened the door. Is everything all right? Did something happen with Tommy? Reeves shook his head. Tommy's safe with the Patels. May I come in? There are some developments you should be aware of. Jessica stepped aside, suddenly conscious of her apartment's Spartan appearance. Moving boxes still stacked in corners, walls bare of decoration, the fold-out table serving as both desk and dining area. Like her life, the space was in limbo, neither temporary nor permanent, just existing in an uncomfortable in-between state. Sorry about the mess, she said automatically. I haven't really settled in yet. Reeves waved away the apology, declining her offer of coffee. Once they were seated at the small table, he got straight to the point. Robert Collins held a press conference this afternoon. He's claiming that you manipulated and coached Tommy into making false accusations because of a personal vendetta. Jessica stared at him, momentarily speechless. What? I'd never even met Robert Collins before yesterday. How could I possibly have a vendetta against him? According to Collins, you applied for a photography job with his real estate company when you first returned to town, and he turned you down. He's suggesting this is your revenge. That's absurd, Jessica sputtered. I never applied for any job with him. I've been focused on building my freelance business since I came back. Reeves nodded, unsurprised by her denial. I figured as much. Unfortunately, he's got his office manager, Lisa Bennington, Jessica supplied. Yes, backing up his story. She claims you approached her about doing professional photography for their listings, and she passed your information to Collins, who declined. Jessica felt her blood pressure rising. That's a complete fabrication. I ran into Lisa at the grocery store when I first moved back, but we barely spoke. I certainly never discussed work with her. A thought struck her. Wait, how would this even make sense as a motive? I'd never met Tommy before yesterday. How would I know he was Robert's son? Let alone that he had injuries to manipulate him about. It doesn't make sense, Reeves agreed. But Collins is desperate and well-connected. He's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. And unfortunately, some people are more than willing to believe him. Jessica rubbed her temples, where a headache was beginning to throb. So what happens now? The investigation continues. The medical examination of Tommy has confirmed that his injuries are consistent with deliberate physical abuse, not accidents or self-harm. The district attorney is reviewing the evidence to determine charges. And Tommy? Where does this leave him? For now, he stays with the Patels. There will be a custody hearing next week to determine a more permanent arrangement pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Reeves hesitated, then added, The system isn't perfect, Ms. Winters, but we're doing everything we can to protect him. Jessica nodded, trying to take comfort in the detective's assurance. Is there anything else I should know? Reeves' expression turned grimmer. Collins' attorney has filed a complaint against you with the Department of Children and Families, claiming you traumatized Tommy by forcing him to expose his injuries in public and photographing him without parental consent. What? Jessica felt the floor tilting beneath her. That's not what happened at all. Tommy chose to show me his arms. And the photographs were part of my job. Every child was being photographed for the school yearbook. I know, Reeves said calmly, and the complaint will likely be dismissed once the full context is understood. But I wanted you to be aware, in case an investigator contacts you. The implications were staggering. Robert Collins wasn't just defending himself. He was going on the offensive, attempting to discredit and possibly punish Jessica for reporting the abuse. He's trying to destroy me, she whispered, the realization settling like ice in her veins. Just like Richard did in Boston. Reeves frowned. Richard. Jessica hadn't meant to reveal that particular wound, but it spilled out anyway. My ex-husband. When I filed for divorce after catching him cheating, he retaliated by spreading rumors that I was mentally unstable. I lost clients, contracts, eventually my entire business. She laughed bitterly. And now here I am, being painted as unstable and vindictive all over again. Reeves studied her with unexpected compassion. That explains why this is hitting you so hard. History repeating itself. Except this time, it's not just my career at stake. It's a child's safety. Jessica straightened her shoulders, finding resolve in that thought. I won't back down, detective. Not this time. No matter what Collins throws at me. I was hoping you'd say that, Reeves admitted. Tommy needs allies who won't be intimidated. He handed her a business card different from the one he'd given her earlier. This is Daryl Washington. He runs the Millfield Community Center. He's also a licensed counselor who specializes in trauma and abuse cases. Jessica accepted the card, puzzled. Why are you giving me this? 2 reasons. First, Daryl's a good person to have in your corner. He's respected in this town and not easily swayed by the Collins family name. Reeves hesitated before adding, second, dealing with abuse cases can bring up painful memories and emotions, especially for those who've experienced similar trauma themselves. Jessica stiffened. I never said, You didn't have to, Reeves said gently. I've worked these cases a long time, Ms. Winters. I recognize the signs. The way you described Tommy's behavior, the specific details you noticed that others missed, those aren't just professional observations. They come from a deeper understanding. She wanted to deny it, to maintain the protective wall she'd built around her childhood memories. But something about Reeves' matter-of-fact tone, devoid of pity or judgment, made denial seem pointless. It was my stepfather, she said finally, the words scraping her throat like broken glass. For 3 years, until I was old enough to threaten to go to the police myself. My mother never believed me, or pretended not to. Reeves nodded, accepting her disclosure without pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. Then you understand better than most what Tommy's facing, and why it matters that you reported what you saw, regardless of the personal cost. I do, Jessica agreed, finding unexpected strength in the admission. For years, she'd buried her history, treating it as a shameful secret rather than the source of insight and empathy it could be. I just hope it's enough, that he doesn't end up back with his father because people in this town can't see past the Collins family reputation. That's where you're wrong, Reeves said, rising to leave. People can see past it, when someone brave enough shows them how. At the door he paused. Lock up behind me, Ms. Winters, and call that number I gave you. Daryl's hosting a community discussion about child welfare at the center tomorrow night. Might be good for you to see that not everyone in Millfield is taking Colin's side. After Reeves left, Jessica double-checked her locks, then sank onto her second-hand couch, emotionally drained. Her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Bracing herself for more hostility, she was surprised to find something entirely different. This is Sunita Patel. Detective Reeves gave me your number. Tommy asked about you today. He wanted to know if you were okay. He's worried his father might be angry with you. If you could send a short message I could read to him, I think it would help him feel less anxious. Jessica's vision blurred with tears as she composed her reply. Please tell Tommy that I'm fine, and he doesn't need to worry about me. Tell him that he was braver than Captain America yesterday, and that I'm honored to know someone so courageous. Tell him that nothing his father says or does will change the truth, and that many people are working to keep him safe now. She hesitated, then added, and please tell him that when he's ready, I'd like to take another photograph of him. Not for school, but just for him. A real portrait that shows who he truly is. A survivor. After sending the message, Jessica moved to her window, looking out at the darkened street below. Millfield had always felt small to her, a place to escape from, not return to. Yet here she was, drawn back by circumstance only to find herself at the center of a storm that would test not just her resilience, but the character of the entire community. As streetlights flickered on, illuminating patches of the familiar sidewalks where she'd once walked as a child, hiding her own secrets, nursing her own invisible wounds, Jessica made a silent promise to Tommy Collins and to her younger self. This time, the truth would not be buried beneath comfortable lies. This time, someone would stand firm against the pressure to look away. This time would be different. The Millfield Community Center occupied what had once been the town's first public library, a stately brick building with tall windows and a small dome crowning its roof. Despite renovations to accommodate modern needs, the center maintained its historical character, from the original oak bookshelves now repurposed for community resources to the reading nooks that had been transformed into small meeting spaces. Jessica arrived 20 minutes early for the community discussion, partly to avoid the awkwardness of walking in once everyone was already seated, and partly because she hadn't been inside the building since high school. She needed time to reorient herself, to prepare for whatever reception might await her. You must be Jessica Winters. A deep voice greeted her as she stepped into the main hall, where chairs were being arranged in a semicircle. The man approaching her was tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and skin the color of burnished mahogany. His smile was warm but evaluating. Michael said you might come. I'm Daryl Washington. Nice to meet you, Jessica replied, accepting his extended hand. His grip was solid and reassuring. Detective Reeves mentioned you're hosting a discussion tonight? Daryl nodded, gesturing for her to follow him toward a small office off the main hall. Child welfare and community responsibility. It was already scheduled before recent events, but the timing couldn't be more appropriate. He closed the office door behind them, offering Jessica a seat. Coffee? Tea? It's not great, but it's hot. I'm fine, thanks. Jessica settled into the chair, noticing the framed credentials on the wall: master's degrees in social work and counseling, certifications in trauma therapy, awards for community service. You've been running this place long? 8 years, Daryl confirmed, leaning against his desk rather than sitting behind it. A deliberate choice that put them on more equal footing. Came back to Millfield after working in Hartford's social services department for a decade. Thought I could make more difference in a smaller community. His expression turned wry. Some days I wonder if that was overly optimistic. Jessica understood the sentiment all too well. Small towns can be resistant to change, or to uncomfortable truths. That they can. Daryl studied her with intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than she was saying. Michael filled me in on the basics of what happened at the school. How are you holding up? The directness of the question caught Jessica off guard. Most people had asked about Tommy, about the investigation, about what would happen next. Few had inquired about her well-being. She started to offer her standard fine, then reconsidered. Actually, it's been harder than I expected. Not just the backlash, but the memories it's bringing up. Daryl nodded, unsurprised. Trauma has a way of resurfacing when we encounter similar situations, especially when we're trying to help someone else through what we experienced ourselves. Again, his perception was uncanny. Detective Reeves told you about my background? Only that you might have personal insight into what Tommy's experiencing, Daryl clarified. He didn't share details. That would be your story to tell, if and when you choose to. The respect for her privacy was refreshing after days of feeling exposed and judged. I appreciate that. Jessica glanced at her watch. Should we head back out? People will be arriving soon. In a minute. Daryl straightened, his expression turning more serious. First, I want you to know what to expect tonight. This town is divided, Jessica. Robert Collins has been making the rounds, garnering support, painting himself as the victim of false accusations. Some of his supporters may show up tonight, and they probably won't be subtle about their opinions. I've already gotten a taste of that, Jessica said grimly. I'm sure you have. But there's another side to Millfield. People who've been concerned about Robert's behavior since Elaine died. People who've noticed changes in Tommy but didn't know how to address them. People who want to do the right thing but weren't sure what that was until now. Daryl's eyes held hers steadily. You're not as alone in this as Robert wants you to believe. The reassurance eased something tight in Jessica's chest. Thank you for telling me that. It's been feeling very isolating. Isolation is a powerful tool for silencing people, Daryl observed. That's why community matters. Speaking of which, there's someone who'd particularly like to meet you tonight, Elaine Collins' sister, Catherine Meadows. She's come down from Albany and is staying with friends while she attempts to connect with Tommy. Jessica blinked in surprise. Tommy has an aunt? Does she know what's been happening? She suspected something wasn't right. Catherine and Robert have a strained relationship, to put it mildly. After Elaine died, he limited Catherine's access to Tommy, claiming her visits were disrupting their healing process. Daryl's tone made clear his skepticism of this explanation. She's been trying to maintain some contact, but Robert has made it increasingly difficult. When she heard about what happened at the school, she came immediately. New pieces of the puzzle clicked into place for Jessica. So Tommy has family who could take him, instead of staying in foster care? That's Catherine's hope. There's a hearing scheduled for Monday morning to determine temporary custody arrangements while the criminal investigation proceeds. A knock at the office door interrupted them. A young volunteer poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Washington, but people are starting to arrive. Thanks, Emma. We'll be right out. As the door closed, Daryl turned back to Jessica. Ready? Jessica took a deep breath, steeling herself. As I'll ever be. The community center's main hall had transformed in their absence, now filled with about 40 people seated in the arranged chairs, with more standing along the walls. Jessica recognized faces from around town, teachers from the elementary school, including Abigail Mercer, business owners from Main Street, parents she'd photographed with their children earlier in the week. The atmosphere hummed with tension, conversations conducted in lowered voices that created a collective murmur of anticipation. Daryl guided Jessica to a seat in the front row, then took his position at the small podium. His presence commanded immediate attention, the room gradually falling silent without him having to call for order. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "As many of you know, this session on child welfare and community responsibility was scheduled weeks ago as part of our ongoing education series. Recent events in our community have made this discussion even more relevant and necessary." A murmur rippled through the audience at this acknowledgement of the elephant in the room. "Before we begin, I want to establish some ground rules," Daryl continued. "First, this is not a forum for discussing specific details of any active investigation or making accusations against individuals. Second, we will maintain respect for all speakers, especially when we disagree with their perspectives. And third, remember that our goal tonight is not to assign blame, but to better understand how we as a community can protect our most vulnerable members." Jessica scanned the room as Daryl outlined the evening's agenda. In the far corner, she spotted Lisa Bennington with two other women she recognized as employees of Collins Realty. Their expressions were uniformly hostile, arms crossed defensively across their chests. On the opposite side sat Detective Reeves, out of uniform but unmistakable with his silver hair and watchful posture. "Many of us struggle to recognize or respond to signs of child abuse," Daryl was saying. "We believe that it doesn't happen here or not in families like that. We mistake indicators of trauma for behavioral problems or developmental issues. Or, perhaps most tragically, we notice concerning signs but convince ourselves that it's not our place to intervene." A woman in the third row raised her hand. "But how can we know for sure? Children fall and get hurt all the time. My own son came home from soccer practice last week with bruises all up his shins. Should I be suspicious of his coach?" "That's an excellent question," Daryl acknowledged. "There's an important distinction between accidental injuries, which, as you point out, are common in active children, and patterns that suggest abuse. May I refer this to our guest speaker? Dr. Patricia Chun is a pediatrician with specialized training in recognizing child abuse." A petite Asian American woman rose from her seat, moving to join Daryl at the podium. With clinical precision but accessible language, she outlined the differences between typical childhood injuries and those that raised red flags, distinctive patterns, injuries in various stages of healing, wounds in locations unlikely to be accidentally injured, burns with distinctive shapes suggesting cigarettes or lighters. Jessica found herself nodding along, mentally cataloging the exact patterns she'd seen on Tommy's arms. When Dr. Chun described children with abuse histories as often being hypervigilant, flinching at sudden movements, or wearing inappropriate clothing to hide injuries, the portrait of Tommy became even clearer. "The most important thing to remember," Dr. Chun concluded, "is that reporting concerns doesn't mean you're accusing someone. You're simply ensuring that trained professionals can evaluate the situation. If there's no abuse, a report harms no one. But if there is abuse and no one reports it, a child continues to suffer." As the doctor returned to her seat, a man near the back stood without waiting to be recognized. "That's easy to say when you're not the one being falsely accused." Jessica recognized him as Frank Delaney, Robert Collins' attorney. "What about the devastation to families torn apart by mistaken or malicious reports? What about reputations destroyed while investigations drag on?" Before Daryl could intervene, another voice spoke up from the middle of the room. "What about the devastation to children who are actually being abused while everyone looks the other way?" All heads turned toward the speaker, a woman in her early 40s with brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a navy cardigan. Something in her features reminded Jessica of Tommy, the same slightly upturned nose, the same determined set to her chin. Daryl cleared his throat. "Everyone, this is Catherine Meadows, who has joined us from Albany." Catherine stood, facing Frank Delaney directly. "You speak of families torn apart, Mr. Delaney. My sister Elaine died 2 years ago. Since then, I've watched my nephew Tommy withdraw into himself. I've seen him change from a talkative, affectionate child to a silent, frightened one. When I expressed concern, I was gradually cut off from contact with him. My calls went unanswered. My visits were refused." Her voice remained steady, though emotions simmered beneath the surface. "So yes, I understand about families being torn apart. Sometimes the tearing happens silently, behind closed doors, while the community sees only what it wants to see." Frank Delaney's face reddened. Robert Collins is a grieving widower who's done his best to raise his son alone, while running a business that employs 12 people in this community. These baseless accusations? Accusing a 9-year-old of lying about how he got cigarette burns on his arms is what's truly baseless. Catherine interrupted, her composure never wavering. "I've seen the medical report, Mr. Delaney. Have you? Or are you too busy spinning narratives about vindictive photographers to look at the actual evidence?" Jessica felt every eye in the room shift toward her at the mention of vindictive photographers. She kept her gaze fixed forward, refusing to shrink under the collective scrutiny. Daryl stepped in before Delaney could respond. "This is exactly the type of specific case discussion I asked us to avoid. Let's return to the broader issue of community responsibility." But the dialogue had already shifted, the abstract discussion of child welfare now inextricably linked to Tommy Collins in everyone's minds. As the formal presentation continued, Jessica could feel the room's energy reorganizing. Subtle shifts in posture, exchanged glances, whispered conversations. Catherine's presence and her unwavering conviction had altered the dynamic, challenging the narrative Robert and his supporters had been cultivating. When the session officially ended an hour later, people didn't immediately disperse. Instead, small clusters formed, engaged in intense discussions. Jessica found herself approached by several attendees, some offering quiet support, others asking thoughtful questions about what she'd witnessed. The outright hostility she'd anticipated from Robert's supporters seemed tempered, at least temporarily, by Catherine's testimony and Dr. Chen's clinical expertise. "Ms. Winters." Catherine Meadows appeared at Jessica's elbow, her expression a mixture of determination and gratitude. "I've been hoping to speak with you." "Of course," Jessica replied, extending her hand. "I'm glad to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Catherine's grip was firm. Better circumstances would have been 2 years ago before. She broke off, glancing around at the lingering attendees. "Is there somewhere we could speak privately?" Daryl, seemingly anticipating this request, approached them. "You're welcome to use my office." Once they were seated in the relative privacy of Daryl's office, Catherine's carefully maintained composure fractured slightly. She pulled a photograph from her purse. Tommy at perhaps 7 years old, grinning widely as he held up a fish on a line. "This was the last vacation we took together, before Elaine got sick. Cape Cod." Catherine's finger traced her nephew's face in the photo. He was such a happy child, curious about everything, always asking questions, never still for a moment. She looked up at Jessica, eyes bright with unshed tears. "When I saw him yesterday at the Patels, he barely spoke above a whisper. He flinched when I tried to hug him. My own nephew, afraid of being touched." Jessica's heart ached for both Tommy and his aunt. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Meadows." "Catherine, please." She carefully returned the photo to her purse. "The social worker tells me Tommy's physical injuries are being well documented and treated. But I'm more concerned about the wounds we can't see, the psychological damage of what he's endured." She focused intently on Jessica. "You're the one who saw past his defenses, who noticed what others missed. How did you know?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Jessica considered deflecting, citing her professional observation skills, but something in Catherine's direct gaze deserved honesty in return. "I recognized something in him," Jessica admitted quietly. "The way he tried to make himself invisible, the practiced excuses, the fear of drawing attention." She hesitated, then added, I was Tommy's age when my own abuse began. Different circumstances, different abuser, but the same need to hide what was happening. The same terror of what would happen if anyone found out. Catherine reached across the space between them, briefly squeezing Jessica's hand. Then you understand why I can't let him go back to that house. Not for a single night, not for supervised visits, not for anything. The courts will determine, Jessica began. The courts will hear arguments from Robert's expensive attorney about his stellar reputation in this town, about how a grieving widower should be given the benefit of the doubt, about how children sometimes misinterpret discipline. Catherine cut in, her voice hardening. They'll consider the trauma of separating a child from his only remaining parent. They'll talk about family reunification as the goal. She leaned forward, intensity radiating from her. I need allies, Ms. Winters. People who will stand firm on Tommy's behalf, no matter how Robert tries to spin this. Will you be one of them? The directness of the request took Jessica aback. She'd already experienced the personal and professional costs of challenging Robert Collins. Standing as a formal witness against him would only intensify those consequences. Yet looking at Catherine, a woman who had driven hours to fight for her nephew's safety, who was willing to face down an entire community's resistance to uncomfortable truths, Jessica couldn't imagine refusing. Yes, she said simply. Whatever Tommy needs, I'm here. Relief softened Catherine's features momentarily before determination reasserted itself. Thank you. The custody hearing is Monday morning. Robert will have his supporters there, people testifying to his character, his contributions to the community. Tommy needs people speaking for him with equal conviction. A knock at the door interrupted them. Darryl poked his head in. Sorry to disturb you, but Detective Reeves is asking to speak with both of you. He says it's important. Reeves entered, closing the door firmly behind him. His expression was grim but satisfied, the look of someone who'd received confirmation of something he'd long suspected. We've been conducting interviews with people who had regular contact with Tommy and Robert, he began without preamble. Teachers, neighbors, Tommy's pediatrician, even the clerk at the convenience store where Robert buys his cigarettes. He glanced significantly at Jessica. The same brand that matches the burns on Tommy's arms. Catherine made a small, pained sound. What we're seeing, Reeves continued, is a clear timeline. After Elaine's death, Robert struggled, understandably. Neighbors report hearing arguments, seeing him drinking more. Tommy's grades began slipping about 6 months later. His attendance became irregular. And approximately 8 months ago, Tommy's pediatrician noted unexplained bruising during a routine physical. Robert claimed Tommy had fallen from his bike. And the doctor accepted that? Catherine asked, incredulous. Dr. Fitzpatrick made a note of possible concern but didn't file a formal report, Reeves explained. He told us he spoke with Robert about the importance of bicycle safety instead. His tone made clear what he thought of this decision. The abuse appears to have escalated gradually, becoming more severe in the past 3 to 4 months. Jessica thought about the patterns of bruising and burns she'd seen on Tommy's arms. Some fresh, some healing, some faded to ghostly shadows. A systematic escalation of violence that might have continued unchecked if Tommy hadn't finally shown her his arms. There's one more thing you should both know, Reeves added. We obtained a warrant to search the Collins home based on the medical evidence. We found Tommy's school assignments hidden under his mattress, papers marked with failing grades, tests with incorrect answers, and beside them, a belt. The implication was clear and horrifying. Tommy had been hiding his academic struggles, knowing they would trigger his father's abuse. My God, Catherine whispered. Elaine would be devastated. She never wanted Tommy to feel pressure about school. She always said learning should be joyful, not stressful. The district attorney is moving forward with charges, Reeves informed them. Child endangerment, physical abuse, assault. Robert was arrested an hour ago. Catherine's relief was palpable. So Tommy is safe. Robert can't get to him now. For the immediate future, yes, Reeves agreed, though his expression remained cautious. But Collins made bail almost immediately. He's been ordered to stay away from Tommy and from both of you. He looked pointedly at Jessica. Given his resources and connections, I'd advise taking precautions. Be aware of your surroundings. Report any concerning behavior immediately. The warning sent a chill through Jessica. She'd experienced hostility and social ostracism since reporting Tommy's abuse, but the thought of Robert Collins potentially seeking more direct retribution hadn't fully registered until now. Are you suggesting he might try to harm us? Catherine asked, voicing Jessica's unspoken concern. I'm suggesting that a man who would burn his son with cigarettes is unpredictable and dangerous, Reeves replied evenly, especially when backed into a corner. As the implications of Reeves' warning settled over them, Darryl cleared his throat. There's something else we need to discuss, the media. Word has spread beyond Millfield. I've had calls from reporters in Hartford and even Boston asking about the case. Once Robert's arrest becomes public knowledge, the coverage will intensify. Jessica felt a surge of anxiety at the thought of reporters digging into her background, potentially uncovering her own history of abuse or the professional collapse that had driven her back to Millfield. Can we prevent that somehow? Keep Tommy's name out of the news at least. As a minor, his identity should be protected in official reports, Reeves said. But in a town this size, with rumors already circulating, it will be difficult to maintain complete privacy. Catherine straightened her shoulders, a new resolve hardening her features. Then we control the narrative. Not Robert, not his attorney, not gossips who don't know the facts. If this has to become public, we ensure that Tommy's welfare remains the central concern, not Robert's reputation or community standing. And how do we do that? Jessica asked. Catherine turned to her with unexpected intensity. Through your photographs, the evidence you captured. Images speak louder than Robert's denials ever could. Jessica shook her head reflexively. Those photographs are evidence in an active investigation. We can't release them to the public. And even if we could, exposing Tommy's injuries that way would only traumatize him further. Not those photographs, Catherine clarified. I'm talking about new ones. Detective Reeves mentioned you've been documenting Tommy's time with the Patels. Jessica nodded slowly. With their permission and the social worker's approval. Just casual shots as he adjusts to their home, interacts with their dog, helps in their garden. Nothing invasive or focused on his injuries. That's exactly what I mean, Catherine said. A visual record of a child beginning to heal, to feel safe again. The contrast between the fearful boy in his school picture and the gradual reemergence of his true self would be powerful testimony. Jessica considered the ethical implications. She'd begun photographing Tommy with the Patels as a way to help him become comfortable with her presence, to associate her camera with positive experiences rather than the traumatic revelation at school. Repurposing those images as evidence or public advocacy would require careful consideration. I'd need Tommy's consent, she said finally, and assurance that it wouldn't interfere with the legal proceedings. It could actually strengthen the case for keeping Tommy with family rather than in long-term foster care, Darryl suggested. Visual evidence of his recovery in a safe environment speaks volumes about the impact Robert had on him. Reeves nodded thoughtfully. I'll check with the DA, but I don't see a legal issue as long as the photographs don't compromise evidence related to the abuse itself. As they discussed logistical details, Jessica found her thoughts returning to Tommy. A boy who had spent months, perhaps years, hiding his suffering beneath layers of fabric and fabricated excuses. Now that his secret was exposed, everything about his life was being examined and dissected by adults with different agendas and priorities. How much agency did he have in this process? How much control over his own story? Before we make any decisions, Jessica interjected, I want to talk to Tommy. Not about the photograph specifically, but about how he's feeling, what he's comfortable with. He's had so many choices taken away from him already. We shouldn't be another group of adults making decisions about his life without his input. Catherine studied Jessica with newfound respect. You're right. Tommy needs to know he has a voice in what happens next. She glanced at her watch. I'm seeing him tomorrow morning at the Patels. Would you join me? He's asked about you several times. The knowledge that Tommy had been thinking about her sent a wave of emotion through Jessica's chest. "I'd like that very much." As they finalized arrangements, Jessica realized that for the first time since discovering Tommy's abuse, she felt something beyond horror and outrage. A fragile hope that justice might actually be possible, that a damaged system might work as intended, that a child's suffering might lead not just to punishment for the perpetrator but healing for the victim. It was a hope tempered by realism. She'd seen too much of life's cruelty to believe in easy resolutions or perfect justice. But looking at Catherine's determination, Reeves' methodical pursuit of evidence, and Daryl's community advocacy, Jessica allowed herself to believe that Tommy Collins might become more than a victim. He might become a survivor, surrounded by adults who believed him, protected him, and helped him reclaim the childhood that Robert had tried to steal. The Patel home sat on a quiet street lined with mature maple trees just beginning to turn gold and crimson. The house itself was a well-maintained colonial with a wraparound porch and carefully tended flower beds where late-season blooms provided splashes of color. As Jessica parked behind Catherine's rental car, she found herself reassessing her mental image of foster care. The Patel's home radiated warmth and stability, the very atmosphere a child in crisis would need. Sunita Patel greeted them at the door with a gentle smile, her silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a practical braid, her movements calm and deliberate. "Tommy's out back with Harold and Buddy," she explained, leading them through a house that smelled of baking bread and brewed tea. "He's been helping with the vegetable garden. We find working with the earth can be very healing for children who've experienced trauma." Through the kitchen window, Jessica could see a small figure kneeling beside an elderly Indian man in the garden, both focused on planting something in the rich soil. A golden retriever lounged nearby, occasionally rising to investigate their progress before settling back in a patch of sunlight. "Buddy has been wonderful for Tommy," Sunita commented, noticing Jessica's gaze. "Animals don't ask questions or make demands. They simply offer unconditional affection." "How is he doing?" Catherine asked, anxiety evident in her voice despite her efforts to appear calm. Sunita considered the question carefully. "He has night terrors, apologizes constantly for the smallest things, still wears long sleeves despite the warm weather." Her expression softened as she looked back toward the garden. "But there are moments when he forgets to be afraid. With Buddy or when Harold taught him to make chapati yesterday. Those moments are becoming more frequent." Catherine blinked back tears. "Thank you for taking care of him." "It's a privilege," Sunita replied simply. "Now let me call them in. I've made tea, and Harold baked chocolate chip cookies this morning specifically because Tommy mentioned they were his favorite." As Sunita stepped onto the back porch to summon them, Jessica felt a flutter of nervousness. Her last interaction with Tommy had been during the traumatic revelation of his abuse. How would he feel seeing her now? Would he resent her for the upheaval that followed? Fear her as another adult who had changed his life without warning? Her concerns evaporated when Tommy entered the kitchen. Though still thin and somewhat subdued, he moved with less tightly wound tension than he had at school. When he spotted Catherine, a smile, small but genuine, transformed his face. Then his gaze found Jessica, and he froze momentarily, his expression difficult to read. "Tommy, you remember Ms. Winters?" Sunita said gently. Tommy nodded, ducking his head slightly. "The photographer. You like Captain America?" Jessica smiled, relieved he remembered their connection. "That's right. Thanks for seeing us today." Harold Patel, a dignified man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, placed a protective hand on Tommy's shoulder. "We've been talking about brave people, haven't we, Tommy? People who speak the truth even when it's difficult." Tommy glanced up at him, then back to Jessica with newfound understanding in his eyes. "Like you did." Jessica felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Like we both did." They settled around the Patel's kitchen table with tea and cookies, the adults carefully keeping the conversation light and unforced. Tommy remained quiet but attentive, occasionally responding to direct questions, visibly relaxing as the visit progressed without any mention of his father or the upcoming hearing. When Harold suggested showing Catherine the vegetables they'd harvested that morning, Sunita smoothly added, Perhaps Tommy could show Jessica the pictures he's been drawing. He's quite talented. Left alone with Tommy, Jessica was careful to maintain a comfortable distance, her movements slow and telegraphed. I heard you've been creating some artwork. Would you like to show me? Tommy hesitated, then nodded, sliding off his chair to retrieve a folder from a nearby desk. When he returned, he carefully spread several drawings on the table between them. Jessica recognized the therapeutic nature of the artwork immediately. These weren't typical childhood drawings but expressions of intense emotion. One depicted a small figure curled in the corner of a dark room. Another showed a looming shadow over a bed. A third featured a house with angry red scribbles emanating from the windows. These are very powerful, Tommy, Jessica said honestly. You're expressing your feelings through art. That takes courage. Tommy traced the edge of one drawing with his finger. Ms. Diana says it helps to put the scary stuff outside of me onto the paper. Ms. Diana is your therapist? Jessica guessed. Tommy nodded. She comes every day. We talk and draw and sometimes play games. He glanced up briefly. She doesn't make me talk about stuff if I don't want to. That's important, Jessica agreed. You should always have a choice about what you share and when. Tommy seemed to consider this, then carefully selected another drawing from the folder, this one different from the others. It showed a crude but recognizable rendering of Captain America's shield protecting a small figure while keeping a larger, darker figure at bay. This is from yesterday, he explained quietly. After Ms. Diana asked who makes me feel safe, Jessica studied the drawing, recognizing the significance of Tommy's chosen imagery. Captain America's shield protects people who can't protect themselves. Yeah. Tommy's voice dropped to a near whisper. But I was thinking about you too. When you saw my arms and didn't pretend like my dad. You made the bad stuff stop. The simple statement hit Jessica with the force of a physical blow. In all her self-doubt and anxiety about the consequences of her actions, she'd almost lost sight of the most fundamental truth. A child who had been suffering was now safe. Whatever came next, whatever price she paid professionally or personally, that fact remained. Tommy, she said carefully, I want to ask you something important, but I want you to know that you can say no, and that's completely okay. He looked up, wariness returning to his posture. I've been taking some photographs of you here with the Patels. Just casual moments, nothing about your injuries or anything that would make you uncomfortable. I thought they might help show the judge at Monday's hearing how well you're doing here, how you're starting to feel safer. She paused, making sure he was following. But those are your experiences, your feelings. So I wanted to ask your permission before I share those photographs with anyone. Tommy's brow furrowed in concentration. Would my dad see them? His lawyer might, Jessica answered honestly. But their purpose would be to help the judge understand that you're doing better now that you're in a safe place. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, thinking, would it help Aunt Catherine? So I could stay with her instead of going back home? The question revealed Tommy's greatest fear and hope simultaneously. It might, Jessica answered. Catherine really wants you to live with her. These photographs could help show why that would be good for you. Tommy nodded slowly. Then it's okay. But he hesitated. But what, Tommy? Remember, you can say no or ask questions about anything. Could you take new pictures, too? Of me and Aunt Catherine together? So they know we belong with each other. The request, so thoughtful and strategic from a 9-year-old who had endured so much, brought fresh tears to Jessica's eyes. That's a brilliant idea. In fact, if you're comfortable, we could take some right now while she's here visiting. For the first time, Tommy's face brightened with something approaching enthusiasm. Can Buddy be in them too? And Mr. and Mrs. Patel? They've been really nice to me. Absolutely, Jessica agreed, recognizing Tommy's desire to acknowledge the support system that had formed around him. Let me get my camera from the car. When she returned with her equipment, she found the Patels and Catherine had rejoined Tommy in the kitchen. She explained Tommy's request, watching as understanding and approval spread across the adults' faces. I think that's a wonderful idea, Sunita said warmly. Tommy, where do you think would be a good place for these photos? The garden, Tommy answered immediately. With the flowers and Buddy. As they moved outside, Jessica observed the natural interactions between Tommy and the adults who had stepped in to protect him. Catherine's gentle encouragement as she helped him arrange marigolds in a small vase for the garden table. Harold's patient guidance as he showed Tommy how to adjust the sprinkler for the newly planted seeds. Sunita's quiet pride as Tommy offered to pour lemonade for everyone from a pitcher that seemed too heavy for his small hands, but which he managed carefully. Jessica photographed these moments not with the clinical detachment of documenting evidence, but with the artistic eye that had once made her one of Boston's most sought-after portrait photographers. She captured Tommy's gradual relaxation as the afternoon progressed, the protective circle of adults around him, the way sunlight illuminated his face when he finally laughed at Buddy's attempt to catch a butterfly. Most importantly, she photographed Tommy with Catherine. The family resemblance evident not just in their features but in their gestures. The way they tilted their heads when listening, the shared expression when concentrating on a task. Through her lens, Jessica recorded the visual evidence of belonging, of genetic and emotional connection that transcended the disruption of the past 2 years. As the light began to fade, signaling the end of their visit, Tommy approached Jessica while the adults were discussing the logistics of Monday's hearing. "Ms. Winters." His voice was stronger than it had been earlier, more certain. "Did you get good pictures?" Jessica knelt to his level, showing him a few preview images on her camera's display screen. "I think so. What do you think?" Tommy studied the photographs with serious attention, lingering on one that showed him and Catherine planting a flower together. Their expressions mirrored concentrations of purpose. "That one's good," he decided. "You can see we're the same." "You are," Jessica agreed softly. "Anyone would recognize that." Tommy's next question caught her off guard. "What happens if the judge doesn't believe the pictures? If he makes me go back to my dad?" The fear behind the question was palpable, and Jessica wrestled with how to answer honestly without increasing his anxiety. "Many people are working very hard to make sure that doesn't happen, Tommy. Detective Reeves, your Aunt Catherine, Mr. and Mrs. Patel, Ms. Diana, and me. We're all telling the truth about what happened and making sure the judge understands." Tommy's fingers traced the edge of the camera screen, his eyes downcast. "Dad says judges always believe grown-ups with important jobs, not kids. He says no one will think he did anything wrong." The calculated nature of Robert's psychological manipulation made Jessica's blood boil, but she kept her voice measured. "Your dad told you that to scare you into keeping secrets, but it's not true. Judges are trained to listen carefully to children, especially in cases like yours. And there's evidence that backs up what you've shared. The doctor's reports, the photographs, everything Detective Reeves found." Tommy seemed to absorb this, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he asked in a small voice, "Will you be there? At the hearing?" "If you want me to be, absolutely," Jessica promised. "I do." Tommy's voice strengthened with conviction. "Because you saw the truth when nobody else did." The Collins custody hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday at the Millfield County Courthouse, a granite building whose imposing facade had intimidated Jessica even as a child. She arrived 45 minutes early, dressed in a conservative navy suit she'd purchased specifically for the occasion, an investment in appearing as credible and professional as possible. She wasn't the first to arrive. A small crowd had already gathered outside the courtroom, Robert's supporters on one side of the corridor, Tommy's advocates on the other, with court officers stationed strategically between them. Jessica spotted Lisa Bennington among Robert's contingent, along with several prominent business owners from Main Street. On Tommy's side stood Catherine, the Patels, Darrell Washington, and, surprisingly, Abigail Mercer, who offered Jessica a small, nervous smile. "Thank you for coming," Catherine greeted her, the strain of the past few days evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "Did you bring the photographs?" Jessica patted her portfolio. "All organized and ready." The judge approved their submission as character evidence through Detective Reeves. Speaking of the detective, he appeared at the end of the hallway, escorting a small figure whose presence caused an immediate hush to fall over both groups. Tommy walked beside Reeves, dressed in neatly pressed khakis and a button-down shirt that must have been newly purchased, as it lacked the overworn quality of his school clothes. Though still wearing long sleeves despite the warm autumn day, he held his head higher than he had at school, his gaze briefly scanning both sides of the hallway before focusing firmly on Catherine. Robert Collins arrived moments later, accompanied by his attorney and several character witnesses Jessica recognized from around town. He was immaculately dressed in an expensive suit, his appearance that of a successful businessman rather than an accused child abuser. When he spotted Tommy, his expression shifted to one of practiced concern and affection. "Tommy," he called softly. "Son, are you okay?" Tommy froze, his body tensing visibly as Reeves stepped slightly in front of him, a protective barrier between father and son. "Mr. Collins," Reeves said firmly, "the protection order specifies no contact, including verbal. Please respect that or I'll have to report a violation to Judge Winters." Robert's concerned facade slipped for just a moment, a flash of cold anger in his eyes, before his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm and murmured something that made him step back. Jessica watched this interaction carefully, noting not just Robert's momentary break in character but also Tommy's physical response. The way his breathing had accelerated, his shoulders hunched, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. The boy's reaction told its own story, one that no amount of character witnesses or carefully constructed narratives could contradict. When the courtroom doors opened, they filed in to their respective sides. The hearing was closed to the general public due to Tommy's age, but those directly involved in the case, family members, potential guardians, witnesses, and advocates, were permitted to attend. Jessica found herself seated between Daryl and Abigail, directly behind Catherine, with Tommy positioned beside his appointed guardian ad litem, a serious-looking woman in her 50s whose job was to represent his best interests in court. Judge Eleanor Winters, no relation to Jessica, despite the shared surname, was a stern-faced woman with steel-gray hair cut in a practical bob. She surveyed the packed courtroom with experienced eyes before addressing the assembly. "Let me be clear from the outset," she began, her voice carrying authority without needing to be raised. "This is not a criminal proceeding. That will come later. Today's hearing has one purpose only: to determine the most appropriate temporary custody arrangement for Thomas Collins while the criminal investigation proceeds. I will not tolerate grandstanding, character assassination, or attempts to litigate the criminal allegations in this courtroom. Is that understood?" Both attorneys nodded their agreement, though Frank Delaney's tightly compressed lips suggested he'd planned precisely such tactics. What followed was a methodical examination of the options before the court. Robert's attorney argued passionately that Tommy should be returned to his father's care under supervision, citing the trauma of separation from his only remaining parent, Robert's previously unblemished reputation, and the lack of a criminal conviction. "Your Honor," Delaney concluded, "Mr. Collins is presumed innocent until proven guilty. To keep a father from his son based on unproven allegations would be a grave injustice to both." Catherine's attorney, a competent woman named Marianne Chun who had been recommended by Detective Reeves, presented a different picture, one of a child showing signs of recovery only after being removed from his father's home, with documented injuries consistent with ongoing abuse, and a maternal aunt willing and able to provide a stable, loving environment. "Thomas Collins has a right to safety," Chen argued, "regardless of whether criminal charges have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The standard in this courtroom is the best interest of the child, and the evidence clearly shows that returning him to Robert Collins' care would place him at risk of further harm." Throughout these arguments, Jessica watched Tommy, seated now beside his guardian ad litem. He stared straight ahead, his face expressionless, his body rigidly controlled, the posture of a child who had learned that displaying emotion could lead to punishment. Only his hands, continuously plucking at the cuffs of his long sleeves, betrayed his anxiety. When Judge Winters called for character witnesses, Robert's supporters took turns describing his community involvement, his business ethics, his apparent devotion to Tommy after Elaine's death. The portrait they painted was of a grieving widower struggling to balance work and single parenthood. Occasionally strict perhaps, but always with Tommy's best interests at heart. Jessica was called to testify next, keenly aware of Robert's cold stare as she took the stand. She focused on maintaining her composure as she described the school photography session, Tommy's reluctance to remove his jacket, and the injuries she discovered. She presented her portfolio, which the judge examined carefully, lingering over both the documentation of Tommy's injuries and the more recent photographs showing his interactions with the Patels and Catherine. "Ms. Winters," Judge Winters asked, looking up from a photograph of Tommy gardening with Harold Patel, "in your professional opinion as someone who observes and captures human interactions, what changes have you noticed in Thomas since his placement with the Patels?" Jessica considered her answer carefully. "The most significant change is in his eyes, Your Honor. When I first photographed Tommy at school, his gaze was defensive, fearful. He was constantly scanning for threats. In these more recent photographs, you can see moments where he's present, engaged, not braced for punishment. It's as if he's remembering how to be a child again, rather than just a survivor." Judge Winters nodded thoughtfully, returning the portfolio. "Thank you, Ms. Winters. You may step down." As testimonies continued, Jessica noticed Robert becoming increasingly agitated, whispering urgently to his attorney, his facade of calm concern cracking around the edges. When Catherine took the stand and described her observations of changes in Tommy's behavior over the past 2 years, Robert's face flushed with suppressed anger. The pivotal moment came when Tommy's guardian ad litem requested that the judge speak with Tommy privately in chambers, a standard practice to allow children to express their preferences without the pressure of facing family members in open court. "Your Honor," Robert's attorney objected immediately, "any testimony from the child will inevitably be influenced by his recent separation from his father and the suggestions of those currently caring for him. Children are highly suggestible." "I'm well aware of the complexities of child testimony, Mr. Delaney," Judge Winters replied dryly. "I've been presiding over family court for 17 years. I can distinguish between coaching and authentic expression." She turned to Tommy's guardian. "Request granted. We'll take a 15-minute recess while I speak with Thomas in chambers." As Tommy was led through a side door by a court officer, Robert half rose from his seat, calling out, "Tommy, remember what we've talked about telling the truth." The warning was clear to everyone in the courtroom, despite its superficial innocuousness. Judge Winters fixed Robert with a stern look. "Mr. Collins, there will be no further comments directed at your son. This is your only warning." The 15 minutes stretched to 20, then 30. When Judge Winters finally returned to the courtroom, her expression gave nothing away. Tommy was escorted to sit with his guardian ad litem, his face pale but composed, avoiding looking in his father's direction entirely. Having reviewed all testimony and evidence, Judge Winters began, "And having spoken at length with Thomas, I am ready to issue my ruling on temporary custody." She folded her hands on the bench before her. "The purpose of this hearing is not to determine criminal guilt, but to ensure the safety and well-being of a minor child during an ongoing investigation. The evidence presented today includes documented physical injuries, testimony from multiple witnesses regarding behavioral changes consistent with abuse, and the child's own statements." She paused, her gaze sweeping the courtroom before settling on Robert. "Mr. Collins, while you are indeed presumed innocent in criminal proceedings, family court operates under a different standard, the best interest of the child. Based on the preponderance of evidence presented today, I find that returning Thomas to your care, even under supervision, would present an unacceptable risk to his physical and emotional well-being." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as Robert's face darkened with barely contained rage. "Temporary custody is therefore awarded to Catherine Meadows, maternal aunt, pending the outcome of criminal proceedings." The judge turned to Catherine. "Ms. Meadows, the court recognizes your willingness to relocate temporarily to provide stability for your nephew. You are ordered to ensure Thomas continues receiving appropriate therapeutic support and to facilitate any interviews or examinations required by the ongoing investigation." Catherine nodded solemnly. "I understand, Your Honor. Thank you." "As for visitation," Judge Winters continued, turning back to Robert, "given the nature of the allegations and Thomas's expressed wishes, all contact between you and your son will remain suspended until further order of this court." "This is outrageous," Robert erupted, rising to his feet despite his attorney's attempt to restrain him. My son is being kept from me based on lies and exaggerations from people who know nothing about our family. Mr. Collins, Judge Winters warned, control yourself or I will hold you in contempt. But Robert was beyond caution now, his carefully maintained facade crumbling completely. You've all been fooled by a child's manipulation and a vindictive photographer's interference. Tommy knows better than to spread these kinds of stories. He knows what happens when he... Robert cut himself off abruptly, but the implications of his unfinished threat hung in the suddenly silent courtroom. When he what, Mr. Collins? Judge Winters asked quietly, her gaze unflinching. When he tells the truth about what happens in your home? Robert's attorney grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, but the damage was done. In his moment of rage, Robert had revealed more about his true nature than any testimony could have conveyed. This hearing is adjourned, Judge Winters declared, bringing down her gavel with finality. Ms. Meadows, please wait with Thomas in the conference room for the custody paperwork. Mr. Collins, you will remain here with your attorney to review the conditions of the custody order. As the courtroom began to empty, Jessica caught Tommy's eye. The boy was trembling slightly, but there was something new in his expression. A cautious relief, perhaps even the first fragile buds of hope. When Catherine put a gentle arm around his shoulders, he didn't flinch away. Outside in the courthouse corridor, Daryl approached Jessica. You should know that Robert's supporters aren't taking this well. There's talk of a community meeting to present the real story, rallying financial support for his defense. This isn't over. I never thought it would be easy, Jessica replied, watching as Tommy and Catherine were escorted toward the conference room by a court officer. But for the first time, I think we might actually win. It's not about winning, Daryl reminded her gently. It's about making sure that boy gets the chance to heal. Jessica nodded, acknowledging the correction. You're right. It's just... She hesitated, trying to articulate the complex emotion welling up inside her. When I was Tommy's age, no one fought for me this way. No one believed me enough to stand up against my stepfather, to face the community backlash, to make the hard choice instead of the comfortable one. And now you're fighting for Tommy the way you wish someone had fought for you, Daryl observed. I guess I am, Jessica admitted. Is that wrong? Am I making this too personal? Daryl considered her question with the thoughtfulness she'd come to expect from him. The most powerful advocacy often comes from those who understand the stakes most intimately. Your personal connection to Tommy's situation doesn't compromise your support. It strengthens it. He smiled slightly. Just make sure you're taking care of yourself too. This kind of case can reopen old wounds. As if on cue, Jessica's phone chimed with a text message. Glancing down, she saw it was from an unknown number. You've made a powerful enemy today. Robert Collins doesn't forget those who cross him. Watch your back, photographer. Jessica showed the message to Daryl, whose expression hardened. Take this to Reeves immediately. Threats like this are taken seriously, especially in the context of a child abuse case. Jessica nodded, already forwarding the message to the detective. She wasn't particularly surprised by the threat. She'd expected some form of retaliation from Robert or his supporters. What surprised her was her own reaction. Instead of fear, she felt a steely resolve hardening within her. Robert Collins had terrorized his son for months, perhaps years, hiding behind his community standing and charitable contributions. He'd used those same advantages to try to discredit Jessica and maintain access to Tommy. But the facade had finally cracked. In that unguarded moment in the courtroom, Robert had revealed his true nature. Not just to the judge, but to everyone present. No amount of community support or legal maneuvering could fully erase what they'd all witnessed. The threatening undertone, the barely controlled rage, the implied consequences for a child who dared to speak the truth. As Jessica waited for Detective Reeves outside the conference room, she caught sight of Tommy through the partially open door. He was sitting beside Catherine, looking at something on her phone. Photographs, Jessica realized, of the home in Albany where he would soon be living. For the first time since she'd met him, Tommy wasn't hunched protectively around himself. His posture was more open, his expression engaged as Catherine pointed out features of what would become his new bedroom. The transformation wasn't complete. Recovery from trauma never followed a simple, linear path. There would be setbacks, difficult days, moments when the weight of his experiences threatened to overwhelm the progress he'd made. But watching him now, Jessica allowed herself to believe that Tommy Collins had taken the first crucial steps on a journey toward healing. And in bearing witness to his courage, in adding her voice to those demanding justice on his behalf, Jessica had begun a parallel journey of her own. Not just a return to the hometown she'd once fled, but a return to the person she'd been before professional setbacks and personal betrayals had diminished her sense of purpose. Through her camera lens, Jessica had always sought to capture truth, to reveal the essence beneath carefully constructed surfaces. Now, that same skill had allowed her to see what others had missed in Tommy's defensive posture and fearful eyes. It had given her the tools to document both his suffering and his resilience, creating a visual narrative that spoke more powerfully than words alone. As Detective Reeves approached, his expression serious as he examined the threatening text on Jessica's phone, she realized that her return to Millfield hadn't been the professional death sentence she'd initially feared. Instead, it had become an unexpected opportunity to use her skills for something that mattered far more than magazine covers or corporate portraits. Protecting a child who had no one else to speak for him, challenging a community to confront uncomfortable truths, and perhaps, in the process, finding a new purpose for her own considerable talents. "We'll trace this," Reeves assured her, handing back her phone. "In the meantime, be vigilant. Document any suspicious activity. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it." Jessica nodded, taking back her phone. "I'm not afraid of Robert Collins," she said, surprising herself with the truth of the statement. "Not anymore." Reeves studied her with newfound respect. "Good, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a much longer fight." He glanced toward the conference room where Tommy sat with Catherine. "For him and for all the others we don't yet know about." Jessica followed his gaze, watching Tommy point to something on Catherine's phone, his face animated as he asked a question. The boy who had hidden behind an oversized jacket, terrified to reveal his wounds, was slowly emerging from his protective shell, finding his voice, reclaiming his childhood one small moment at a time. "Then we keep fighting," Jessica said simply, "for as long as it takes." The first snowfall of the season arrived 2 weeks after the custody hearing, transforming Millfield into a postcard-perfect New England town. White blanketed the town square, softened the edges of buildings along Main Street, and muffled the usual sounds of daily life. Standing at her apartment window, Jessica watched children in bright winter gear building snowmen in the park across the street, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass. Among them was Tommy, bundled in a new red coat and matching hat, gifts from Catherine, who had found a small apartment 3 blocks from Jessica's while she sorted out the logistics of potentially relocating permanently to Millfield. Even from a distance, Jessica could see the change in him. He moved with more freedom, his body language open as he showed another boy how to properly pack a snowball. When Catherine approached with steaming mugs of what was likely hot chocolate, Tommy accepted his with a smile that transformed his entire face. 2 weeks. It seemed impossible that such profound change could occur in such a short time, yet the evidence was right before her eyes. Without the constant stress of anticipating his father's next outburst, Tommy was gradually emerging from his protective shell, rediscovering what it meant to simply be a child. Jessica's phone chimed with a text from Catherine. "He asked if you'd come take pictures of his snowman before it melts. No pressure if you're busy." The invitation warmed Jessica more than the space heater struggling against the drafts in her old apartment. She had been documenting Tommy's journey since the custody hearing, not just for potential legal evidence now, but as a record of his healing process. Each photograph captured another small victory. Tommy petting Buddy the golden retriever without flinching when the dog moved suddenly. Tommy raising his hand in class, according to Abigail Mercer. Tommy wearing a short-sleeved shirt indoors as his bruises faded, no longer feeling the need to hide his arms. "On my way," she texted back, already reaching for her camera bag. Outside, the crisp air carried the distinctive scent of snow, clean, sharp, with hints of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Jessica navigated the freshly shoveled sidewalks carefully, nodding greetings to neighbors who now fell into two distinct categories. Those who smiled and waved back, and those who deliberately looked away, their allegiance to Robert Collins requiring them to treat her as persona non grata. The division in Millfield had only deepened since the custody hearing. Robert's supporters had indeed organized, forming a Justice for Collins committee that held regular meetings at the Knights of Columbus Hall and maintained a social media presence dedicated to proclaiming his innocence. They characterized Tommy as a troubled child who had fabricated abuse allegations for attention, and Jessica as an opportunistic outsider exploiting the situation to resurrect her failed career. The accusations stung, but Jessica found them easier to bear than she might have expected. Each photograph of Tommy's gradual transformation served as a private rebuttal to their claims. The truth was visible in his increasingly relaxed posture, in eyes that now made contact instead of darting away, in the voice that grew stronger with each passing day. "Ms. Jessica," Tommy called when he spotted her approaching the park. He waved enthusiastically, Snowball temporarily forgotten. "Come see what we made." Jessica raised her camera in greeting, heart lightening at his unself-conscious excitement. These moments, when Tommy forgot to be vigilant, when joy overcame fear, were the true measure of his progress. "That's quite an impressive snowman," she commented, admiring the slightly lopsided creation that nonetheless boasted the traditional carrot nose and coal eyes. Someone had contributed a red scarf, which Tommy was adjusting with serious concentration. "It's not a snowman," Tommy corrected, with the particular gravity children reserved for adults who have missed something obvious. "It's Captain America. See his shield." He pointed to a circular sled propped against the snow figure. "My mistake," Jessica said solemnly, dropping to one knee to capture the perfect angle of Tommy beside his snowy creation. "Stand next to Captain America so I can get you both in the shot." Tommy complied, then asked with newfound confidence, "Can you take one of me and Aunt Catherine too?" "Absolutely," Jessica agreed, signaling Catherine to join them. As she adjusted her lens to frame the shot, she marveled at the natural ease between aunt and nephew. The way Catherine's hand rested lightly on Tommy's shoulder without causing him to tense, the similar tilt of their heads as they smiled for the camera. "Perfect," Jessica declared after capturing several shots. "These are going to be great." Tommy beamed, then turned to his aunt with a hopeful expression. "Can Ms. Jessica come to dinner tonight? You said we could have mac and cheese." Catherine laughed, meeting Jessica's eyes over Tommy's head. "I did promise mac and cheese, that's true. And Ms. Jessica is certainly welcome if she's free." The casual invitation reflected how their lives had become intertwined over the past 2 weeks. Jessica had gone from being the photographer who discovered Tommy's abuse to a regular presence in his new life. Someone who understood what he'd been through without needing him to talk about it, who captured his good days with her camera and sat quietly with him on the difficult ones. "I'd love to come," Jessica replied, "especially if mac and cheese is involved." Tommy's grin widened. "With the crispy breadcrumb top? Like Grandma used to make." "Exactly like Mom used to make," Catherine confirmed, ruffling his hair affectionately. "Now finish your hot chocolate before it gets cold. We need to head home soon to start preparing." As Tommy gulped the remaining cocoa, Jessica noticed a familiar figure watching them from across the park. Detective Reeves, out of uniform but unmistakable with his silver hair and alert posture. He raised a hand in greeting but didn't approach, maintaining a discreet distance while conducting what was obviously an unofficial check on Tommy's well-being. Jessica excused herself briefly to walk over to him. "Keeping an eye on things?" she asked. Reeves nodded, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Just making sure everyone's safe. Robert's been making noise, calling in favors with the mayor, filing complaints against me for misconduct during the investigation, generally trying to make life difficult for anyone involved in removing Tommy from his custody." "But the criminal case is still proceeding?" Jessica asked, anxiety tightening her chest. "Absolutely. The DA is moving forward with charges: child endangerment, assault, child abuse. The evidence is solid." Reeves tugged his scarf higher against the cold. "But Robert's not going down without a fight. He's hired one of the best criminal defense attorneys in Hartford, and they're working every angle to discredit the case before it goes to trial. Jessica glanced back at Tommy, now engaged in an impromptu snowball fight with his new friend. He seems so much better with Catherine. He is, Reeves agreed. The child psychologist who's been working with him says his progress is remarkable, given the circumstances. That's going to be important evidence when we get to the permanent custody determination. Something in Reeves' tone caught Jessica's attention. You're worried about something. The detective hesitated, then admitted. Robert's attorney is pushing for a psychological evaluation of Tommy, claiming his allegations are the result of coaching and suggestion following his mother's death. They're trying to build a case that Tommy was already emotionally disturbed and either imagined the abuse or self-inflicted the injuries. That's absurd, Jessica protested. No child gives themselves cigarette burns. I know that, and you know that, Reeves said grimly. But all they need to do is create reasonable doubt. If they can convince a jury that Tommy is unstable or unreliable, it undermines the entire case. Jessica felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. What can we do? Keep documenting his progress with Catherine. Show that he's thriving away from his father, not deteriorating. And, Reeves glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. Be careful. Robert's been asking questions about you, where you live, where you go, who you spend time with. I don't like it. He's trying to intimidate me, Jessica said, more statement than question. At minimum, I've increased patrols near your apartment and Catherine's place, but stay vigilant. Don't establish predictable routines. Vary your schedule and routes. The warning was sobering, but Jessica refused to let it dampen the day. I appreciate the heads up, and your unofficial snowman inspection. Reeves smiled slightly, his serious demeanor softening. Captain America Snowman, he corrected, nodding toward Tommy's creation. The shield gives it away. Catherine's apartment was a testament to her determination to create a stable environment for Tommy despite the temporary nature of their living situation. She transformed the small two-bedroom rental with familiar items brought from Albany, family photographs, Tommy's favorite bedspread with space rockets, books he remembered from visits to her home before his father had restricted contact. Jessica arrived for dinner with her laptop, ready to show them the snowman photographs she'd edited that afternoon. Tommy answered the door, his earlier enthusiasm somewhat subdued, a reminder that his recovery wasn't a straight line but a series of ups and downs. Everything okay? Jessica asked quietly as she hung her coat on the rack by the door. Tommy shrugged, then whispered, Dad called Aunt Catherine again. I heard them arguing. Jessica kept her expression neutral despite her concern. I see. Want to help me set up my computer so we can look at the pictures after dinner? The distraction worked, pulling Tommy back from whatever dark thoughts his father's continued presence in their lives had triggered. By the time Catherine emerged from the kitchen, Tommy was eagerly showing Jessica a drawing he'd made in art therapy. A colorful scene of a house with 4 stick figures standing outside. That's Aunt Catherine, he explained, pointing to the tallest figure. And that's me. And that's Buddy. The dog was recognizable by its 4 legs and what appeared to be a very happy face. Who's the 4th person? Jessica asked gently. Tommy hesitated, his finger hovering over the final figure. That's you, he said finally. Because you come to visit a lot and you take pictures of the good things, not just the bad things. The simple statement caught Jessica unprepared, emotion tightening her throat. I'm honored to be included in your picture, Tommy. Catherine appeared in the doorway, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Dinner's ready, you two. Tommy, would you please wash your hands? As Tommy headed to the bathroom, Catherine motioned Jessica into the kitchen, keeping her voice low. Robert's attorney served me with papers today. They're demanding a full psychological evaluation of Tommy, supervised visitation, and access to all his therapy records. Jessica absorbed this with growing alarm. Can they do that? They can certainly try. Catherine pulled a casserole dish from the oven, the rich aroma of cheesy pasta filling the kitchen. My attorney says we can fight the therapy records request on confidentiality grounds, but the psychological evaluation will be harder to prevent. As for visitation, She set the dish down with more force than necessary. I'll fight that with everything I have. Tommy panics at the mere mention of seeing his father. Like he did just now, when he mentioned the phone call? Catherine nodded wearily. Robert somehow got my cell number. He calls constantly. Sometimes threatening, sometimes pleading, sometimes acting like nothing's wrong and he just wants to check on our boy. She mimicked the last phrase with evident disgust. It's classic manipulation, but knowing that doesn't make it any easier to handle. Have you told Reeves? That could violate the protection order. I've reported every call. But Robert's careful. He uses burner phones, calls from blocked numbers. By the time they trace it, he's moved on to another method. Catherine rubbed her temples. The worst part is knowing that Tommy overhears some of it, no matter how careful I am. Before Jessica could respond, Tommy returned, proudly displaying his freshly washed hands. All clean. Perfect timing, Catherine said, her voice brightening with practiced ease. Who's ready for the world-famous Meadows mac and cheese? Dinner conversation stayed deliberately light, focusing on Tommy's adventures in the snow, his progress in his new school, and the photographs Jessica had taken. If Tommy sensed the underlying tension, he gave no sign, happily chatting about his art class project and his new friend Zach, who had helped build the Captain America snowman. It was only later, as they reviewed the day's photographs on Jessica's laptop, that Tommy's anxiety resurfaced. A notification appeared on Jessica's screen, an email from Daryl Washington with the subject line, Collins update/urgent. Tommy froze, his body tensing at the mere sight of his father's name. Catherine noticed immediately, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Tommy, why don't you go choose a book for bedtime while Ms. Jessica and I talk for a minute? The boy nodded silently, casting one fearful glance at the screen before retreating to his bedroom. Once he was out of earshot, Catherine turned to Jessica with concern etched in her features. What is it? Jessica opened the email, scanning its contents with growing unease. Roberts called an emergency town meeting for tomorrow night at the Knights of Columbus Hall. He's presenting what he calls the true story of a community betrayal and evidence of a conspiracy to destroy a grieving family. Catherine's expression hardened. He's going public with his counter-narrative. Daryl says he's recruited several prominent community members to speak on his behalf. The mayor, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, even Pastor Mitchell from First Methodist. Of course he has, Catherine said bitterly. Robert's always been skilled at collecting influential allies. Elaine used to call it his superpower, making people feel special, indebted, connected to his success. Jessica continued reading. Daryl's concerned because the meeting is being framed as a community forum, but only Robert's supporters were directly invited. He's worried it will become a platform for attacking everyone involved in reporting or investigating the abuse, the school, CPS, the police. She looked up, meeting Catherine's troubled gaze. And us. Let him try, Catherine said, a steely determination in her voice. The medical evidence doesn't lie. Tommy's injuries weren't imaginary, and they weren't self-inflicted. No, but public opinion matters, especially in a small town. If Robert successfully portrays himself as the victim of false allegations, it could impact everything from jury selection to the permanent custody decision. Jessica closed her laptop. Daryl wants to organize a counterpresence, not to disrupt, but to ensure there are witnesses who know the full story. Catherine nodded grimly. I'll be there. Are you sure that's wise? Robert will be there, and things could get heated. I spent 2 years being gradually pushed out of Tommy's life because I was too cautious, too willing to give Robert the benefit of the doubt. I won't make that mistake again. Catherine's voice dropped as she glanced toward Tommy's bedroom. Besides, he won't be alone. Mrs. Patel offered to stay with him whenever I need to attend meetings or court dates. Jessica hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling her since reading Reeves' warning about Robert's inquiries. Catherine, has Tommy talked much about what happened before? About when the abuse started or what triggered it? Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Not in detail. His therapist says he's not ready to process the full trauma narrative yet. But he has mentioned that things got really bad when he brought home a failing math test. Apparently, Robert had been drinking more heavily that night than usual. Does Tommy know why his father started drinking so much? Was it entirely about Elaine's death? I don't think it's that simple, Catherine said carefully. Elaine's illness was financially devastating, even with insurance. The medical bills. She shook her head. Robert remortgaged their house, took out loans. His business suffered while he was caring for her. After she died, the economic pressure only increased. Tommy mentioned once that his father was always opening letters that made him angry, making late-night phone calls where he begged for more time. The picture became clearer. A man crushed between grief and financial ruin, turning to alcohol for escape, then to violence when the pressure became unbearable. It didn't excuse Robert's actions, but it helped explain the transformation from apparently devoted father to abuser. The irony, Catherine continued softly, is that Elaine left a life insurance policy specifically to provide for Tommy's education. Robert was the trustee, but the money was meant for Tommy's future. I wonder if he's been using it to keep his business afloat instead. Before Jessica could respond, Tommy appeared in the doorway, clutching a well-worn copy of The Lion, The Witch and the Wardrobe. "I'm ready for story time," he announced. Catherine smiled. The conversation about Robert immediately shelved. "Excellent choice. Let's see where we left off with Lucy and Mr. Tumnus." As Catherine led Tommy back to his bedroom, Jessica gathered her things, mind racing with the implications of tomorrow's town meeting. Robert Collins was escalating his campaign to reclaim his son and his reputation. The coming confrontation wouldn't just be legal but public, a battle for the heart and soul of Millfield itself. The Knights of Columbus Hall was filled beyond capacity by the time Jessica arrived with Daryl the following evening. They slipped in through a side entrance, finding seats near the back where they could observe without immediately drawing attention. Catherine was already there, seated beside Abigail Mercer and several other teachers from Millfield Elementary who had chosen to support Tommy despite pressure from the school board to remain neutral. At the front of the room, a long table had been set up on a small raised platform. Robert Collins sat at the center, flanked by his attorney, Frank Delaney, Mayor Jim Hargrove, and several other community leaders. Robert had dressed the part of the wronged father perfectly. Conservative suit, appropriate somber expression, a framed photograph of Tommy placed prominently before him. "Quite the production," Daryl murmured as the mayor called the meeting to order. "Notice who's not here? Detective Reeves, Judge Winters, Dr. Chun, anyone with actual professional knowledge of abuse cases." "They probably weren't invited," Jessica replied quietly, "or couldn't ethically attend, given the ongoing case." Mayor Hargrove, a portly man with a politician's practice smile, addressed the packed room. "Friends and neighbors, we've gathered tonight to address a matter of great concern to our community. As many of you know, one of our most respected citizens, Robert Collins, has been accused of serious misconduct toward his son. These allegations have divided our town and caused tremendous pain to a family already suffering from the loss of a beloved wife and mother. The framing was masterful, positioning Robert as the victim, the community as the judge, the legal proceedings as an outside attack on one of their own. Jessica glanced around, noting the nodding heads and sympathetic expressions on many faces. "Before we hear from Robert, I want to emphasize that this meeting is not about attacking individuals or institutions. It's about supporting a neighbor in crisis and ensuring that justice is pursued with fairness and compassion." The mayor's disclaimer rang hollow as Robert Collins took the microphone, his expression carefully modulated to convey dignified suffering rather than anger. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice thick with emotion. "When I lost Elaine 2 years ago, this community wrapped its arms around Tommy and me. You brought meals, helped with childcare, supported us in countless ways. I thought the worst pain of my life was behind me." He paused, eyes downcast. "I was wrong." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the audience. 6 weeks ago, my son was taken from me based on a misunderstanding and a series of false assumptions. A seasonal employee, a photographer with no child welfare training, made serious allegations after seeing bruises on Tommy's arms. Bruises that any parent of an active 9-year-old boy would recognize as normal childhood injuries. Jessica tensed at the characterization, but Daryl placed a restraining hand on her arm, silently urging patience. What followed was a nightmare no parent should endure, Robert continued. My home was searched, my character questioned, my parenting examined under a microscope. Most devastatingly, my son, my only child who had already lost his mother, was removed from his home and placed with my late wife's sister, a woman who has harbored resentment toward me since Elaine's illness. Catherine's body stiffened, but like Jessica, she remained silent, allowing Robert to spin his narrative uninterrupted. I'm not perfect, Robert admitted, his voice breaking slightly. Raising a child alone while running a business is incredibly challenging. Tommy has struggled with his mother's death, acting out in ways that are difficult to manage. There were times I was stricter than I should have been. Times my grief made me less patient than he deserved. The strategic confession was brilliant, acknowledging minor failings to make the denial of serious abuse more credible. But I would never harm my son. The suggestion that I would burn him with cigarettes. Robert's voice trailed off, emotion apparently overwhelming him. Frank Delaney smoothly took over. Medical experts we've consulted have noted that the circular marks on Tommy's arms are consistent with several common childhood conditions, including impetigo and certain allergic reactions. Furthermore, Tommy's emotional state following his mother's death made him particularly vulnerable to suggestion and confusion about the source of his injuries. Jessica had heard enough. She rose from her seat, drawing every eye in the room as she moved deliberately toward the microphone set up for audience questions. Ms. Winters, Mayor Hargrove acknowledged her reluctantly. While we welcome all community members, we haven't reached the question portion yet. I'm not here to ask questions, Jessica said clearly. I'm here to ensure that everyone in this room understands exactly what this meeting is. A calculated attempt to undermine a legitimate child abuse investigation through public manipulation. A chorus of objections rose from Robert's supporters, but Jessica continued, her voice carrying over the noise. The injuries I saw on Tommy Collins' arms were not impetigo or allergic reactions. They were deliberate cigarette burns in various stages of healing, alongside linear bruising consistent with being struck by a belt. These findings were confirmed by medical professionals with specialized training in identifying child abuse. Robert stood abruptly. How dare you come here and repeat these defamatory claims? You had no right to photograph my son without consent, no qualification to interpret his injuries, no business inserting yourself into our lives. I had every right and responsibility to report suspected abuse, Jessica countered steadily, as does every adult in this room, regardless of qualifications or training. Delaney stepped forward, his tone condescending. Ms. Winters, I understand you may believe you were acting appropriately, but your history of personal and professional instability raises serious questions about your judgment in this matter. The attack was unexpected, and Jessica faltered momentarily. My history has nothing to do with, doesn't it? Delaney pressed. Your failed marriage, your collapsed career in Boston, your own childhood experiences that might lead you to see abuse where none exists. These are relevant factors when evaluating the reliability of your claims. The room had gone silent, all eyes fixed on Jessica as Delaney systematically dismantled her credibility. He'd clearly done his research, unearthing personal details she'd shared with few people in Millfield. This isn't about me, Jessica insisted, fighting to maintain her composure. It's about Tommy and the very real injuries he suffered. Is it? Robert interjected. Or is it about finding purpose by inserting yourself into someone else's tragedy? About rebuilding your damaged reputation through performative heroism? The accusation struck with precision, targeting Jessica's deepest insecurities about her motives. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she overreacted? Had her own past colored her perception of Tommy's injuries? No. The image of those cigarette burns flashed in her mind, dispelling the doubt. Those were real, deliberate, and unmistakable. Before she could respond, Catherine appeared beside her at the microphone. My sister would be disgusted by this spectacle, she stated, her quiet voice somehow more powerful than Robert's practiced performance. Elaine loved her son more than anything in this world. She would have moved heaven and earth to protect him from harm, including harm inflicted by his father. Robert's face darkened. Don't you dare speak for Elaine. You weren't there during her illness. You didn't see what our family endured. I wasn't there, Catherine agreed, because you gradually restricted my access, just as you're now trying to control this narrative. But I know my sister, and I know the changes in her son since her death. The withdrawn, frightened boy I saw 2 months ago was not grieving. He was terrified. Murmurs rippled through the audience, some supportive, others hostile. The room had become a physical manifestation of Millfield's division, those who believed Robert's carefully constructed persona versus those willing to consider the uncomfortable evidence against him. Darrell Washington rose then, his commanding presence drawing attention as he moved to stand with Jessica and Catherine. As a licensed counselor specializing in trauma and abuse, I'd like to address Mr. Delaney's claims about Tommy's injuries. While I can't discuss specific details of an active case, I can state unequivocally that the medical documentation I've reviewed is consistent with non-accidental trauma, injuries deliberately inflicted by an adult. Mayor Hargrove attempted to regain control of the meeting. This forum was intended as a show of support for a community member, not a debate about evidence that will be properly examined in court. That's precisely the problem, Jessica responded. This isn't a neutral forum. It's a carefully orchestrated attempt to influence potential jurors and public opinion before the case reaches court. Robert slammed his hand on the table, his facade of dignified suffering finally cracking. Enough! I've lost my wife, my son, and now my reputation because of these baseless accusations. Tommy has problems, emotional problems that began after his mother died. He harms himself, tells stories, acts out for attention. Any parent dealing with childhood trauma would recognize these behaviors. The outburst silenced the room. In his anger, Robert had revealed more than he intended, not just his frustration, but his willingness to publicly characterize his son as unstable and unreliable, to sacrifice Tommy's well-being and reputation to protect his own. Catherine addressed the audience directly, her voice steady despite the emotion underlying her words. I invite anyone who truly cares about Tommy's welfare to look at the evidence objectively. Compare photographs of him from before these allegations to now, 6 weeks after being removed from his father's care. See for yourselves which Tommy appears traumatized and which appears to be healing. As if on cue, the doors at the back of the hall opened, and Detective Reeves entered, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers. He scanned the room briefly before approaching the raised platform. Robert Collins, he announced formally, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of violating the protection order prohibiting contact with Thomas Collins. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Robert stared at Reeves in disbelief. This is harassment. I haven't been anywhere near my son. The warrant relates to 17 documented attempts to contact Thomas by telephone, including 3 calls placed to Catherine Meadows' residence today, during which you spoke directly to your son despite explicit court orders prohibiting such contact. Delaney immediately intervened. Detective, surely this matter could be addressed through proper channels, rather than with a public arrest during a community meeting. The judge who issued the warrant specifically noted Mr. Collins' pattern of attempting to intimidate witnesses and manipulate public opinion. Reeves replied evenly. The timing and location of the arrest are at my discretion. As the officers moved to escort a visibly furious Robert from the hall, chaos erupted. Supporters shouted accusations of police overreach and corruption, while others sat in stunned silence, witnessing the unraveling of Robert Collins' carefully constructed public persona. In the midst of the commotion, Jessica noticed something she hadn't seen before. A man near the back of the room recording the entire confrontation on a professional camera. Catching her eye, he nodded slightly before slipping out a side door. Press, she realized. Robert's community forum had attracted media attention beyond Millfield's borders. This isn't over, Delaney announced to the crowd as Robert was led away. This is a perfect example of the coordinated campaign against my client. designed to humiliate him publicly and prejudice his cases, both criminal and civil. Actually, Daryl countered, addressing the increasingly unsettled audience. This is what accountability looks like. No amount of community standing or charitable contributions places anyone above the law, especially laws designed to protect children from harm. As the meeting dissolved into arguing factions, Jessica, Catherine, and Daryl made their way outside, where the night air provided welcome relief from the heated atmosphere inside. That was quite an entrance, Jessica commented to Reeves, who joined them moments later after ensuring Robert was properly processed by the officers. The warrant was legitimate, Reeves replied. Robert's been escalating his attempts to contact Tommy, including showing up at his school yesterday, claiming he needed to deliver important medication. Fortunately, the principal called me instead of allowing the contact. Catherine paled. He went to Tommy's school? I wasn't informed. The principal handled it appropriately, and Tommy wasn't aware of the incident. Reeves ran a hand through his silver hair. But it demonstrates Robert's growing desperation. As the criminal case builds and his chances of regaining custody diminish, he's becoming more reckless. Jessica thought about the threatening text messages she'd received, the whispered hostility when she shopped on Main Street, the anonymous note left on her car warning her to stop spreading lies. What happens now? She asked. Robert will be released on bail, but with stricter conditions. The judge has ordered electronic monitoring to ensure he maintains the required distance from both Tommy and Catherine's residences. Reeves' expression remained concerned. But legal restrictions only work on people who respect the law. I'd advise continued vigilance. As they discussed security precautions, Jessica noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Lisa Bennington's red SUV. Lisa sat behind the wheel, watching their group with an unreadable expression. When she realized Jessica had spotted her, she didn't look away but instead held her gaze for a long moment before starting her car and driving slowly past them. Another of Robert's loyal supporters? Daryl asked, following Jessica's gaze. Former friend, Jessica corrected, though I'm not so sure about the loyal supporter part anymore. She didn't speak up during the meeting, and she's been conspicuously absent from recent justice for Collins events. Reeves nodded thoughtfully. People close to Robert are beginning to notice the inconsistencies in his story, the gaps between his public persona and private behavior. Lisa works with him daily. She may be seeing sides of him that cause her to question her initial certainty. The possibility that Robert's support system might be fracturing offered a glimmer of hope. If those who knew him best were beginning to doubt, perhaps others would follow. I should get back to Tommy, Catherine said, checking her watch. Sunita said she'd have him in bed by 9, but he often has trouble falling asleep if his routine is disrupted. As Catherine departed, Reeves pulled Jessica and Daryl aside. There's something else you should know. The DA's office has been building their case, investigating Robert's finances as part of establishing a timeline and potential motives for the abuse. Catherine mentioned he was under financial pressure after Elaine's medical bills, Jessica noted. It goes beyond that, Reeves said grimly. They've discovered significant irregularities in how Robert managed Tommy's trust fund, the life insurance money Elaine left specifically for her son's future. Daryl's expression darkened. He misappropriated it? Diverted almost all of it into his failing real estate business, using the trust as collateral for high-interest loans. If the criminal case wasn't enough, he's potentially facing financial fraud charges as well. The new information cast Robert's desperate attempts to regain custody in an even more troubling light. Was his fight for Tommy motivated by genuine parental love, or by the need to maintain control over financial resources he'd illegally accessed? Jessica shivered in the cold night air, the weight of everything they'd learned settling heavily on her shoulders. What had begun as a simple school photography assignment had unraveled into a complex web of abuse, deception, and corruption that reached into the heart of Millfield's power structure. Get some rest, Reeves advised, noting her exhaustion. Robert's arrest tonight will escalate things. His supporters will be angry, looking for someone to blame. Stay alert, especially in public places. Jessica nodded, though rest seemed unlikely given the churning of her thoughts. As she drove home through Millfield's quiet streets, she found herself taking a detour past Catherine's apartment building, reassured by the sight of a police cruiser parked discreetly nearby. Tommy was safe, at least for tonight. Back in her own apartment, Jessica downloaded the photographs from the snow day, immersing herself in the images of Tommy's rare moments of uncomplicated joy. The contrast between the frightened boy she'd first met and the child gradually emerging from trauma's shadow was stark and moving. As she prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Bracing herself for another threat, she was surprised to read, "It's Lisa. We need to talk. Not about Robert. About Tommy. I've been remembering things, noticing patterns. Things I should have seen before. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Carson's Diner?" Jessica stared at the message, trying to decipher its implications. Lisa had been one of Robert's most vocal defenders, accusing Jessica of fabricating concerns for attention. What had changed? Was this a genuine outreach or some kind of trap? After careful consideration, she replied, "I'll be there, but I'm bringing Daryl Washington with me." The response came quickly, "Fine. Bring whoever you need to feel safe. This isn't about sides anymore. It's about doing right by Tommy." Jessica set her phone aside, uncertain whether to feel hopeful or wary about this unexpected development. If Lisa was truly beginning to question Robert's innocence, it could mark a significant turning point. As Robert's office manager and longtime friend, Lisa had access to information others didn't. His daily moods, his business practices, perhaps even evidence of his financial manipulations. Sleep remained elusive as Jessica's mind cycled through possibilities. Was Lisa reaching out because she'd found something incriminating? Had she witnessed concerning behavior that finally made her question her loyalty? Or was this an elaborate setup orchestrated by Robert to gather information about their strategy? Eventually, Jessica drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with fragmented images. Tommy's bruised arms, Robert's rage-contorted face at the town meeting, Lisa watching silently from her car. Carson's Diner occupied a prime location on Main Street, its chrome and red vinyl interior unchanged since the 1950s. At precisely 2 p.m., Jessica and Daryl entered, scanning the lunch crowd for Lisa. They found her in a back booth, nervously shredding a paper napkin, a cup of coffee cooling untouched before her. "Thank you for coming," Lisa said as they slid into the booth across from her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually impeccable appearance showed signs of strain. Chipped nail polish, hair hastily pulled back, a blouse buttoned incorrectly at the top. "Your message was unexpected," Jessica replied cautiously. Lisa nodded, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot. "I've been struggling since the custody hearing. Things Robert said, things he's done since. They don't align with the man I thought I knew." Daryl's expression remained neutral. "What specifically has concerned you, Lisa?" "At first, I believed him completely," Lisa admitted. "The Robert the first knew was charming, generous, committed to Tommy. When Jessica made those allegations," she met Jessica's eyes briefly, "I thought you were either mistaken or looking for attention. I couldn't reconcile the Robert who organized fundraisers for the Children's Hospital with someone who would hurt his own son. People who abuse children rarely do so publicly," Daryl noted. "They compartmentalize, presenting a perfect face to the world while acting very differently in private." "I'm beginning to understand that," Lisa said quietly. After the custody hearing, Robert changed. He became obsessed with regaining control of Tommy, but in ways that seemed off. He talked about Tommy's trust fund as much as Tommy himself. When colleagues expressed sympathy about his separation from his son, he'd say the right things if anyone was watching, but the moment they left, his concern would vanish. Jessica exchanged a glance with Daryl. "You mentioned remembering things? Noticing patterns?" Lisa took a deep breath. "Last summer, Tommy often came to the office after day camp. He'd sit quietly in the corner, drawing or reading. I noticed he always wore long sleeves, even during the August heat wave. When I asked if he was cold, Robert answered for him, said Tommy had sensitive skin that burned easily. That's a common excuse abusers use, Daryl commented. There were other things, Lisa continued. Tommy flinching when Robert raised his voice on phone calls. Mysterious sick days that always seemed to follow Robert's nights out drinking with clients. Once, I stopped by their house to drop off contracts that needed immediate signatures. Tommy answered the door with a split lip. Robert said he'd fallen off his bike, but there was no bike in sight, and Tommy wouldn't make eye contact. Jessica felt a mixture of vindication and anger. Vindication that her observations of Tommy had been accurate. Anger that so many people had noticed concerning signs yet failed to act. "Why are you telling us this now?" she asked, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. Lisa's hands trembled as she reached for her purse, extracting a small USB drive. "Because yesterday, while Robert was being processed for his arrest, I found these on the company computer. He'd been trying to delete them when the police arrived, but didn't have time to finish." She pushed the drive across the table. They're photographs of Tommy's injuries, taken by Robert himself, dated, cataloged, like documentation. Jessica stared at the drive, repulsed by the implications. "He photographed the injuries he inflicted?" "It appears so," Lisa confirmed, her voice barely audible. "There are dozens of images going back almost a year, and notes, detailed notes about what Tommy did wrong to earn each punishment. The clinical coldness required to document such abuse was staggering. This wasn't just a father losing control in moments of stress. It suggested a systematic approach to Tommy's abuse, a deliberate record-keeping that hinted at something deeply pathological. "Have you shown these to the police?" Daryl asked urgently. Lisa shook her head. "I came to you first because I need to know if I'm doing the right thing. Robert's been like family to me for years. If I hand these over, I'm not just reporting him. I'm ensuring he goes to prison. But if I don't," her voice broke, "if I don't, I'm protecting someone who hurt a child. Who hurt Tommy." Jessica thought of the frightened boy she'd first met, slowly revealing his wounded arms, and the gradually healing child she'd photographed building a snowman. The choice seemed blindingly clear to her, but she recognized Lisa's genuine moral struggle. "Lisa," she said gently, "think about Tommy, about what he needs, about the courage it took for him to show me his arms that day, knowing what could happen. He's just a little boy," Lisa whispered. "He trusted adults to protect him, and we all failed him. I failed him." "You haven't failed him yet," Daryl said firmly. "What you do with this evidence will determine that." Lisa squared her shoulders, a decision visibly forming in her tired features. "We should go to Detective Reeves now. Together." As they prepared to leave, the diner's door swung open, and Robert Collins himself walked in. He'd apparently been released on bail, the electronic monitoring anklet visible beneath his pant leg. His eyes swept the restaurant, widening in shock when he spotted Lisa sitting with Jessica and Daryl. "Lisa?" he called across the diner, drawing every customer's attention. "What are you doing with them?" Lisa froze, the USB drive clutched tightly in her palm. Jessica shifted slightly, blocking Robert's view of the incriminating evidence. "Just having lunch, Robert," Lisa replied, her voice remarkably steady despite her obvious fear. "I didn't realize you'd been released." Robert's eyes narrowed with suspicion as he approached their booth. "Having lunch with the people trying to destroy me? Interesting choice of dining companions. They have as much right to eat here as anyone," Lisa countered, rising from her seat. "And I should get back to the office. Those listings won't process themselves." She managed to slip the USB drive into her pocket without Robert noticing, but as she attempted to move past him toward the exit, he gripped her arm, his fingers digging invisibly. "We need to talk, Lisa, privately, about loyalty and what it means." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Jessica stood immediately. "Let her go, Robert. This doesn't concern you," Robert snarled, his charming public persona nowhere in evidence. "Lisa works for me. We have business matters to discuss." "Not while you're hurting her," Daryl interjected. his imposing height bringing him eye to eye with Robert as he too stood. "You're already facing charges for violating a protection order. Do you want to add assault to the list?" Several diners had pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation. Robert noticed, his expression shifting rapidly as he calculated the public relations damage of a scene. He released Lisa's arm, stepping back with a forced smile. "Just a misunderstanding," he announced for the benefit of his audience. "Lisa and I have worked together for years. Sometimes our professional discussions get passionate.